We welcome your attendance. We ask that you do not approach members of panel during the meeting and that the proceedings are observed quietly and without interruption. If this is not adhered to, you may be asked to leave and the meeting will be suspended while this is facilitated. City Plans panel deals with applications from the city centre as well as the largest and most significant applications the council receives. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, registered speakers and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Can I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have done so, and I will start to my left.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Daljit Singh. I lead the Central Area Planning Team.
Hi, John Hall, Leeds City Council Planning Officer in the City Centre team.
Hello, Gillian McLeod. I'm Head of Development Services for Highways and Transportation.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year. Councillor Kayleigh Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward, and I, just for your information, Chair, I'm going to be recusing myself for agenda item 7 as I'm too supportive of that application.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Councillor Kilamanaka and I represent Bermontoffs and Richmond Hill.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Katie Dyke, Beck and Seacroft Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Cardell, Carlin Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Lewis Footick, part of the Plans Panel Admin Team.
Good afternoon, John Stonard, Design and Projects Team Leader in the Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Worley Ward.
Hello everyone and Happy New Year. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, my name's Robert Finnegan, I represent the Morley North Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Simon Seary from the Putty Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Debbie Oldham and I'm clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Jess Lishman, legal advisor to the panel. Also in attendance we have my colleague Philippa Plumtree Valley, who will be advising on agenda item number 8.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you, everybody. Just before we move on to the agenda, can I just bring Councillor Campbell in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I felt it's important that we say a few words about the late Brian Walker. Most of you will know that he sadly passed away, I think just after Christmas, and his funeral was a week or so ago. I think Brian made a major contribution to the city. When I was first appointed to a plans committee, as it was in those days, and no, it wasn't when Queen Victoria was on the throne. It does seem a long time ago. But Brian chaired that committee in those days, and he was very welcoming, very friendly, very helpful actually to me as a new member, and I recall him initiating me to the delights of site visits. And I can remember the site visit we went on together out to Beeston. He was the author of the famous Leeds Look, which has somewhat fallen out of fashion at the moment, but certainly was famous across the city. And he had very clear views, I think, on what development should look like in the city. And he did drive it and made a significant contribution to the cityscape it is at the moment. Later on, of course, he got demoted from being chair of the Plans Committee and was made leader of council. Again, I think in those days it was a different world we lived in. But again, he was always, I suppose, very gentlemanly, I think, in debate. Something that seems to have disappeared a bit these days. And I think the city is poorer for his passing. And I felt it important that, if possible, we remember him this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. And unfortunately, this morning, we've also heard of the passing of Terry Yorath. And bearing in mind that we do have the Leeds United application on the agenda this afternoon, we would like to obviously pass our condolences to friends and family of Terry and the club. So thank you for being here, and we'd like to just, say that and pass our condolences on. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the agenda then, can we start with agenda item number 1, please?
Thank you. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt information. Agenda item 3, there's no late items. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests?
Councillor Campbell, Councillor Finnegan, sorry.
I'd like to declare, in terms of openness and transparency, I am a season ticket holder for Huddersfield Town Football Club, and as such I will have an open mind entirely and utterly about the application at item 8.
Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. Don't put the scarf back on, please.
Thank you. Under agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Maloney. Councillor Jones was due to attend as her substitute, however it would appear that he may be unwell, so apologies from him as well, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move to agenda item number 6, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of October, which was the last meeting of City Plans. I will first of all take the minutes for accuracy, and then I will ask for matters arising. So on the minutes then, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5 and page 6. Okay, can we accept those as a true and accurate record of the meeting? Yep, thank you everybody. And any matters arising from those minutes at all? No. Okay, thank you, panel. Right, so we will move on to agenda item number 7, which is the application for land off Kirksall Road for a variation of conditions 2, 54, 57, 64 to the already approved planning application for the scheme changes and outline element of approved development proposals. So can I hand over to yourself, John, to present that, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make sure these slides are moving back and forth. Yep, they seem to be. So the application relates to a large 5-hectare site along Kirkstall Road, just to the west of the city centre. The site is bound by Kirkstall Road to the north and by the River Aire to the south. Across Kirkstall Road are a range of commercial uses, including a hotel and a fire station. There are also a number of student blocks. On the other side of the river, at Otter Island, lies a housing development. The site has hybrid planning permission to deliver 1,620 homes alongside ground floor non-residential uses and extensive areas of public realm. The applicant, Latimer Developments, is the development arm of Clarion Housing Group, which is a charitable organisation and a large housing association. Clarion are committed to delivering 35% affordable homes across the site. The site is split into 2 phases, as shown on this slide. Phase 1, which relates to the eastern part of the site, has full detailed consent for 6 residential blocks ranging from 10 to 17 stories in height, with commercial and community uses at ground floor. Phase 1 will deliver 806 new homes. And Phase 2, the western part of the site, and shown greyed out on the slide, only has outline consent. As well as the defined land uses and access arrangements, the outline consent sets the upper building limits and creates a 3-dimensional building envelope within which detailed proposals will be brought forward through future reserved matters applications. Currently, Phase 2 is expected to deliver 814 units. As we saw during this morning's site visit, Phase 1 is under construction and the new pedestrian cycle bridge over the River Aire is in place, albeit yet to open. Since planning approval was granted in 2022, there is increasing pressure to deliver greater numbers of affordable homes. As a registered provider, Clarion are well placed to assist with delivery. They have undertaken a review of their land holdings and consider this site capable of delivering a higher density development than consented. The proposal therefore seeks to increase height and massing parameters to enable an uplift of 233 units, of which 232 would be affordable. The proposal relates solely to changes to the outline Phase 2 part of the site. No changes are proposed to Phase 1. So this slide shows the consented scheme on the left and proposed changes on the right hand side, so you can see the uplift in heights. The increase to heights of buildings would be along the blocks fronting the River Aire. Blocks would increase from 13 to 17 stories, from 11 to 28 stories, and from 11 to 13 stories. Other changes include replacing townhouses with 4-storey apartment buildings. As stated, the increase in height and massing would enable a further 233 additional homes, including 232 affordable homes. The proposal also seeks to reduce the amount of car parking from 213 to 144 spaces and increase the long and short stay cycle parking provision with 183 additional long stay and 44 additional short stay spaces. In overall terms, including both phases 1 and 2, the revised scheme will deliver 1,853 new homes. The principal concerns with the application include impact on townscape and neighbouring development. In terms of the townscape, the overall building arrangement remains consistent with the consented scheme in that it comprises large blocks running perpendicular to Kirkstall Road and the river. The taller elements are still positioned along the outer edge of the site, with heights stepping down towards the middle. Extensive landscaped areas remain a key feature, including a new riverside promenade. This slide shows the proposed building footprints compared to consented, and there would be associated revisions to public realm, including 0.28 hectares of additional landscaping. The major design change is, of course, the increase in building heights, with apartment blocks now ranging from 9 to 28 stories, compared with 8 to 15 stories under the current consent. Development in this location is guided by 2 key documents: the Tall Buildings SPD and the Kirkstall Road Renaissance Area Planning Framework. The documents support a gradual reduction in building height as development moves away from the city centre, although proposals are still expected to be assessed on their own merits. Relatively modest height increases across some blocks are not expected to significantly affect the townscape. However, the introduction of a 28-storey building would depart from the established principle of stepping down building heights away from the city centre and therefore requires robust justification. In this instance, the proposed building is intended to function as a landmark building, marking the new river crossing, which is strategically important and forms part of a key pedestrian gateway into the city centre and provides connections between Wellington Bridge, the Junction development, and the recently completed Monk Bridge Viaduct Garden, as well as access to the canal. The marker building would also contribute to placemaking, anchoring the wider development, which will deliver close to 2,000 new homes alongside a range of mixed uses. Moreover, taller buildings have recently been approved on the other side of the Inner Ring Road, including schemes over 40 stories at the former Yorkshire Post site and at Lisbon Street. This ensures a clear hierarchy of building heights, with the tallest structures still focused within the city centre. And this is a section drawing looking towards the city centre. You can see how the buildings relate to consented schemes further into the city centre. The Council's design team considers the proposed approach a thoughtful response to both existing and emerging townscape conditions, using additional height strategically to enhance legibility. The application includes a design code which sets a clear framework for future development. It specifies that the marker building should be distinctive, with a strong vertical emphasis and a clearly articulated base, body and crown, ensuring a high-quality landmark design. The design team is satisfied that the design code provides sufficient assurance that the required design quality can be achieved, and the Council's head of design is on hand to help answer any questions in relation to townscape. The application is accompanied by a townscape and visual impact assessment, which identifies the locations from which the proposed development may be visible. This assessment has informed the selection of representative viewpoints and the preparation of verified visuals to evaluate potential impacts on key views. including those from Kirkstall Road, Wellington Street, the Canal, Otter Island, and nearby parks and residential areas. And I'll quickly, there's a lot, but I'll quickly run through some of them. So there were 25 viewpoints identified. This is looking west along Kirkstall Road. This is the consented scheme and proposed. So you can see the 28-storey building there, just along the river. Again, from Kirkstall Road, looking from the other direction towards town, and you can see the scale compared with consented city centre schemes. At Oddy's Lock on the canal, and where we stood this morning, this is consented against proposed. At Wellington Bridge, the new Monkbridge Viaduct Garden. This is a longer distance view from Woodhouse, Bellevue Road, facing south, consented and proposed. A couple more. This is looking from Armley. You see the top of the building there in the skyline. Holbeck Cemetery would sit against the city centre developments. From Victoria Square outside the art gallery, you would see the top of the building from there. And finally, a view from Grade 2 listed Castleton Mill. In terms of residential amenity, the biggest impact is on the housing at Otter Island. The river acts as a natural buffer, mitigating potential perceptions of enclosure and softening the visual impact. Step massing, a building separation of around 50 metres to the nearest residential block, and breaks in the building line further reduce the impact on residents. And I have a slide here which shows the separation distances between proposed blocks and the housing at Otter Island. So ranging from 50 metres at the minimum point to 70 metres where you have the tallest part of the scheme at 28 stories. The application includes an updated daylight and sunlight assessment, which confirms that the proposed development will not lead to unacceptable levels of daylight and sunlight at Otter Island. In terms of affordable housing, the proposal would deliver 743 affordable units, which represents 40% of the scheme. This is an increase from 35% under the current approval. The policy requirement here is 7%. The affordable housing will be delivered using Homes England grant funding. However, grant funding rules prevent affordable housing being identified through any condition, planning condition or obligation within the Section 106, and therefore the 40% cannot be secured through the planning permission. However, as a registered provider and having already secured funding for the detailed part of the scheme, the risk that funding will be rescinded is low. Nevertheless, to protect the Council's position in respect of its adopted affordable housing policies, a clause is contained within the 106 requiring the affordable housing position to be revisited in the event grant funding does not materialise. Latimer will construct the affordable housing and hand over the completed units to Clarion. Clarion will own and manage the social rental properties and will be responsible for their future lettings and maintenance. As stated, details on design, landscaping, floor layouts, car and cycle parking provision, etc. will be determined at reserved matter stage. However, there is a condition attached to the current consent requiring 10% of Phase 2 units to be 3-bedroom, and this condition will be carried over. 4 comments have been received. Leeds Civic Trust have no objection to the general massing and the increased height, but understandably, much depends on the final design. And 3 members of the public, one who wrote in just earlier today, also are objecting to the height and the impact on townscape. And finally, I'll leave you with a couple of images. These are illustrative images only, with the final designs needing to be worked up, but they help give a sense of the proposals. So this is a long elevation on along Kirkstall Road, with the consented scheme above and proposed below. The difference is fairly modest, with heights on Kirkstall Road remaining as approved. And this image is looking from the bridge towards the new marker building where the proposed changes are concentrated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have no speakers on this item, but the applicant's representatives are here. Okay, so I'm going to start with questions to officers. So if members can, if you do have a question, if you can indicate, Councillor Carlow, I can see you already, and Councillor Finnegan. So I'll take, and Councillor Dyke. Right, so Councillor Carlow first, please.
Thank you for that. I guess it's a bit of a technical matter and explanation. You pointed out, and I've noticed the wording in the report, that if that funding doesn't come through, the proposed grant funding, then it would need, as part of the Section 106, there'd be an agreement to revisit the proposal. Can you just lay out what we mean by revisit? Do we mean bring it back to this panel? Do we mean that officers will then make a view on what the percentage of affordable housing would be? Just some clarification on what we mean. Thank you.
So the applicant will be required to come back to the local planning authority. It's up to us then how we deal with whatever they propose. Our starting point will clearly be the development plan. So whatever the policy is at the time, we would, I assume, be saying you need to deliver that much affordable housing. Depending on the position at the time, we may or may not decide to bring it back to this panel.
Just coming briefly, I think we'd probably like to have it come back just as an item noted, but thank you. I appreciate it's from that funding. I appreciate as well, probably if they're not getting this funding, it would affect then their outline, just as it has. Getting the funding has made them change. Thank you.
Councillor Finnegan.
Do we have a breakdown of the housing mix for the affordables? I know we're talking about 3 bedrooms and 10%. Do we have a breakdown of the rest of the affordables, what they are, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, whatever they are?
I don't know actually if the applicant would like to step up to help answer that.
Would you like to come forward and let us know the mix of the affordable units, please?
Hiya, Anna Turton from Lichfields, I'm planning consultant. In terms of the mix, because this element in terms of the Section 73 applications outline, the mix isn't fixed, so the mix will come forward as part of subsequent reserve matters applications for each of there's kind of 3 defined plots, so it will be put forward for approval as part of each one, but within that there will be a commitment to 10% 3-bed, which is controlled by the existing planning condition on the permission.
Yeah.
You, I don't know, you can't say for certain at this particular point, but many of us on Plans Panel have had concerns about the fact there are too many 1-bedroom apartments and not enough for 2 and 3 beds. And the same with houses. It's a consistent concern that we've raised at that point. How will that will be reflected in the affordables? Because if they're all going to be 1-bedroom apartments, that's slightly different from a point of view of there might be some 2s and there might be some 3s in there. So I'm trying to at least understand the broad direction you're likely to travel in terms of the affordables specifically.
I'm not sure at this stage because we're at outline, so the scheme's not developed in that amount of detail. I don't know whether Clarion are here. I don't know whether they've got anything to add in terms of their intentions going forward.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Mike Briffett, I'm the Regional Managing Director for Latimer Developments, part of Clarion Housing Group. We'll develop a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, which is appropriate to the location, but I think the most important thing is we'll be working constantly with our housing management colleagues to make sure particularly that their requirements and the needs of local residents are met. So in terms of 1 beds, our housing management team wouldn't want to see more than 25% of 1 beds across the whole of the site. And then we'll develop the rest of the mix in accordance with housing need. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. If you just want to stay there, just in case we have any more questions, thank you. Councillor Dye, I had you next.
Thank you. My question is about the landscaping. So you said in your presentation that there would be additional landscaping in the and then a little bit later that there would be, I think landscape unchanged. I can't remember. But the comments that you've made, how do they fit in with the picture? If you don't mind going back, Lewis, to slide 6, please, which seemed to me to show that the green space had been reduced. So if you could just add some comments on that, please.
Okay, yeah, I'll move over to the slide showing the building footprints. This one here. So the consented scheme is outlined in red, and as part of the proposal, they're actually removing a non-residential building. You can maybe just make out on the right-hand side of the image. So they're reducing the footprint slightly, which means that there'd be more area given over to landscaping. There's not much of a difference, but it's a slight increase. But the details of the landscaping would come forward through the reserve matters application.
Just explain.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so that's the building that's being removed. A slight shifting of the footprints, therefore, just generates slightly more landscaping in public realm.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That makes sense. I think it's possibly the previous slide was a little bit misleading in that, that it seemed to show at the front. Can you see on the left it's shaded in green, and on the right it isn't?
Yeah, it should be shaded green.
Right.
Really on the back
Okay.
side, yeah.
So it's significant amounts of green space.
No.
Super. Thank you, Chair.
That's great, thank you. Do we have any more questions to officers or indeed to developers agents? No? Okay, right, comments. Any comments from members? Councillor Campbell.
I'll start off. I think none of us here would wish to refuse anything that produced extra affordable units. The plus about this particular proposal is it's almost all affordable. It does, however, mean an increase in density on site. And I suppose in many ways that's perhaps not as much of an issue in this location as it might be in other parts of the city, because the entire corridor that's running on Kirksall Road between that and the river is an area which is being developed to a high density of residential accommodation. And I think I understand from what we were told on site this morning that in effect Homes England are divvying up some money to help you put these in. And far be it from me to say no if the government's throwing money at us. There are two elements. I think when we were on site, the thing that struck me, because we looked, for those who weren't there, we looked at the building that's already taking place. Unfortunately, for our benefit, the contractor had written the number of the floor on the lift column, so we were able to work out just how tall this landmark building will be. And if I'm honest, it's very tall. It's very tall. And I suppose I appreciate that we're still in a discussion phase, and I just wonder if it's just a little bit too tall. And whether it wouldn't be possible to perhaps increase heights along the Kirksall Road frontage by a floor or something like that to try and mitigate against that. Because as a landmark building, it's slightly strange that it's in the middle of the site. I would have thought if you were doing a landmark building, you put it at the edge of the site where more people can see it. That's up to you to design. I suppose the bottom line, of course, is in the past we've always said, and I think we'll continue to say, hopefully, that we are prepared to accept a tall building, if it's a good one, it has to be, if you're talking about a landmark building, it has to be a building that we're all, people who drive past it or go past it on the train or walk past it when they go along the canal, say to themselves, this is a building that Leeds can be proud of. And I think that's my criteria on that one. I suppose there are two other things that we're not actually finally agreeing the design at the moment. And I'll pick up the point that was made on the opposite side in relation to if the 282 for some reason or other don't happen, we would like it to come back to panel. I think this is with the best will of the world to Dalgett and his team, I think it's a decision, we're making this decision here, so if that decision is going to be unravelled, we need to make a decision ourselves. So, you may find it strange, but in principle, I'm quite happy with the idea that we increase the density on site, particularly if those are all affordables. And I'm also happy with the idea that we tweak the size of the buildings, because if you look on the opposite side of the river, there's lots of different sized buildings. I would like you to give some thought to the tallest building, because it is about twice as high as the one next to it, as to whether actually there might not be other areas or other elements of the blocks that you could tweak to perhaps make it not quite so tall. I appreciate why you've done it. But generally in principle, I think if we're being asked to agree the idea that we increase the density, and I'm quite happy with that, and I'm more than happy, given those comments, to propose that.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Sorry, I can't bring you in to respond because we have moved on to comments, and I did omit to ask you to go back to the public gallery because we have finished questions. So if you want to leave the table and just move back, sorry. But I am going to bring in John from our design team, if that's okay, just with regards to Councillor Campbell's comments about the design and the height of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I don't disagree at all with anything that Councillor Campbell has said. Having looked at this for a considerable length of time, it is a challenge, and there's no denying that it's a substantial change. It is a significant height to deal with, and I can assure members that we did look at various options for accommodating additional units, and one of which was spreading the height across the site, loading it potentially onto Kirkstall Road. I have to say, though, that the Kirkstall Road frontage, and we could possibly bring up one of the I think it's one of the first couple from the visualisations. Sorry, Lewis. Yeah, I guess that'd do. It is. There is already substantial height onto Kirkstall Road. I'm conscious that elevation is north facing, so I mean it would cast it would cast a shadow across the road. It is quite. I say that the height there is already substantial, and to add to it, it was felt that would just make it oppressive. In all honesty, beyond the approved scheme. The advantage of the height is that it does, as I say, on a city-wide level, stepping back some distance in the longer views, it does mark that point for the river crossing, which is significant within Kirkstall Valley. There are very, very few crossings of the river. There is open space at that point. It's essentially the hub of this scheme, and it allows the collection of buildings to provide, in our view, an interesting silhouette and a positive skyline rather than just a mass of buildings of a similar scale, which would give you a large block. So there was an ambition to create a degree of sculpture to the form when seen from distance, and an awareness of the potential impact of height at close quarters, particularly on the Kirkstall Road corridor, which is not the greatest of environments at present.
If I can quickly come back, I suppose we all have our different opinions about this. That's yours. Mine's slightly different. I think there is capacity for articulation in some of the buildings. I don't want to get into a design discussion with you, but I do think that perhaps there is capacity within what's still quite a substantial area of development for a tweak to make, well, if I'm honest, to make these things look less blocky. And with the best will in the world, I know that they generally they're quite well designed, but they are very blocky, and I just wonder if there is not some capacity to make them a little bit fancier, for want of a better word. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Blackburn, I had you next.
I've got to say, I think when Councillor Campbell noticed the numbers on the other side this morning, and we saw 14 out, and it's going to, it was quite a shock. Not to say that we haven't to give permission for buildings taller than that in city. It was just within that place. I suppose the matter is this: it depends on what the quality of that building is, and if that is a quality building that looks in place, that sort of lessen, I think, that shock. But I've got to say, I've got to support what Councillor Campbell said. Is it could do with sort of spreading out over other blocks, because you know, a 28 story. I mean, it's only 28 stories, I think, wasn't it? Block is far too bigger than the rest of them that's planned, and it just looked totally out of place.
Thank you, Councillor Manaka.
Thank you, Chair. Just at the back of what everyone is saying, and I looked at page 29 in regards to obviously the density, the height of the buildings, and then I go into wind. I do have quite an interest on wind because I usually walk, and I looked at the mitigation there. It says, you know, it would be great to actually have perhaps maybe to understand what kind of mitigation this is. I know that we are still at the final stages at the moment, but it would be great to actually see what type of the wind mitigation specifics there would be. It would be great to have that in panel.
Okay, is that a question you have? We have moved on to comments.
I think it's more of a comment, maybe, to say bring it back in. Maybe I'm thinking. It's just
okay,
a comment,
I'm going to bring officers in, and we'll and to look at how we can address that. Yeah.
I haven't got a slide, but I was just going to say, and to members, that in the report it talks about there needing to be a total of 36 wind baffles to mitigate some of the harm from wind. But speaking to the applicant and agent, it's hoped as we work through the final design of the buildings, that the number of wind baffles can be reduced, and those that do need to be there will obviously, there's a condition attached to work through those details to make sure that they harmonise with the rest of the landscaping, and they can be featured in their own right, so they're not just big lumps of metal kind of just scattered around the site.
Yeah, and just in terms of your last comment, Councillor, we can clearly bring back the reserve matters when we get the full details of development back to panel. So not only do we have the controls within the design code in terms of the outline consent and through the conditions that John alluded to earlier, when we actually do get the details, we can bring them back to panel if that's panel's wish.
Yeah, I think that might be, will be discussed, but I think that might be something we need to do with other comments. Yeah, Councillor Dye, I had you next.
Thank you, Chair. I am quite convinced by the design arguments personally. I think the idea of rather than the mass moving towards the road, it's shaping throughout the site is quite exciting. I think it would be acceptable to have a building of that height if, as others have said before me, it is a really good building. So I think that's quite key, and I think absolutely it should come back to panel so that we can really dig into the detail of that. But at this stage, I find the proposals really quite interesting in terms of the shape, and having that tall building, I don't see that as an issue. But it would be brilliant if it's a building that we can be really proud of and say, yep, you know, it's a standout building rather than just a tall thing in the middle of a bunch of other buildings.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from members? Councillor Finnegan.
Happy to second Councillor Campbell's proposals. We're agreeing the principle, the nitty-gritty, the specifics will come back on reserved matters anyway, so I formally second Councillor Campbell's proposal that we agree what's in front of us.
Okay, thank you. Daljit, would you like to sum up with from the discussion? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, members. So there's support for the principle of what's being brought before members in terms of the changes and in terms of the scope of the changes. There have been some comments about the impact of the tallest block. We have, as John has outlined, looked carefully at different ways of increasing the density across the site. But for the reasons that John outlined, we think that this is the best way to deliver that greater density in terms of this site and context. However, in terms of the details, we can bring that back to members because there's clearly a desire for members to be involved in the full details and wanting to sign off on the appearance of the buildings, and it's quite clear to me that the requirement is for a very high quality building in this location. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so based on the summary provided and the fact that the reserve matters will come back to panel, and then obviously a further discussion can be had around questions that people have raised and comments people have raised today. We are looking at the recommendation on page 13. Obviously, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Finnegan have moved that we bring that reserve matters back. We look at the issues that have been raised. So, sorry,
Chairman.
1 second.
Just
Sorry, point of clarification. Sorry.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. So, because of the size of the site and the many different phases, there'll be reserve matters for different phases in terms of the outline. Is it just the phase that involves the tallest element, the tall building, that you particularly wanted to come back, or are you wanting to see the other phases as well of the reserve matters for the outline?
Councillor Campbell.
If I can help, Chair, I would have assumed that given that at the moment this is just an outline, we would see at some point or other all the detailed design. I assumed, as with the other half of the site, that effectively the works would all take place as one, and not individual blocks and then come back. Now, if you're telling me that, that's probably slightly different, because if one is built in one particular way, it affects how the rest. So I think we're trying to get an overview, aren't we, of everything. And I was very specific. I assume you'd show us that anyway. When I was talking about coming back to panel, I was talking about the issue about the affordable units in particular. That has to come back to us.
So the development is being carried out in phases. What you saw on site today was part of the overall scheme, a phase, or one phase of the overall scheme. in terms of what we members have already consented, in terms of the existing planning permission, there's an overall cohesiveness in terms of landscaping, in terms of the connectivity, in terms of the design, and that has been agreed for the full half of the site, and that sets from it has to carry through for the outline consent, I would say, in terms of the road layouts, treatments, and routes. In terms of the buildings, in terms of the mix, in terms of the detailed elevational design, those are details that will come to us on a phase-by-phase basis, and that's why I've asked that question of clarification.
I don't know whether we're talking at slightly cross purposes here. If we were on site today and half the site is being developed, they're actually there sticking the thing up. So that's phase one, my understanding. What we're looking at now is phase two, which involves changing the mass of some of the buildings and the position of some of the buildings. It doesn't in itself change the principle that we agreed for the entirety of the site. So the principles for the entirety of the site, i.e. the through road and the riverside path and all the rest of it, I'd take that as a given. I'm simply saying that when we're talking about the coming back to panel, I assumed, as I said, that the detailed designs of the units within that would come back to panel. And as I said, the thing that we were insisting on is that if the affordables changes in when then that comes back as a slightly separate item, because the whole rationale for us agreeing this is that we're going to get another 280 odd affordable units. And I think I don't understand. I'm not sure what the problem is, really, quite frankly. You would bring back under normal circumstances, you bring back the detail, wouldn't you?
Well, phase two detail,
In terms of the outline consent, there's a full element and there's a outline element, and there's two areas for that. So in terms of this presentation, that's been referred to as phase one and phase two. In terms of the build out, there's actually more phases. It's more building by building, or it's more than one building by building, but there's blocks across the site. So it's a simple question. We may not get the reserve matters for all the blocks within the outline half of the site, 2.5 hectares, in one go. Now, if members' particular interest is in looking at the design of the tallest phase of development, we can bring that back. If it's for the rest of it, we can bring it back at each phase.
So which would you like to do, Councillor Campbell?
Well, I quite frankly, Dalgy, if we change one element of this, then that affects the rest. So to come forward with effectively a piecemeal set of proposals on each block seems to me contrary to what we've agreed to the principle as the whole. Now we're agreeing in principle, I think. Well, one thing. One, increase the density and increase the massing. That's what we're really being asked to do. Okay. Now, that could be that they may decide to make, instead of making this a 28-storey, they make it a 26, the big one, which means they're going to have to increase the mass somewhere else. Now, provided we stick within the mass and numbers, I don't think we're hassled. But I think we would expect to see the design, because the design always changes, and in particular we want to see the design of this one, but we need to see how the design of this one impacts on the design of the rest of that element.
Okay, sorry, we've just had a slight spillage. I'm just going to let that be mopped up because I'm conscious we're going to move to a vote. So just 2 seconds and I'll let you just mop that up. Yeah, you've definitely had an effect, Councillor Campbell. Sorry, I didn't want people to get up and be moving around as we were moving to the vote, that's all. So I just thought I'd better let you do that before we move on. So just to kind of move on from that then, we are moving to a vote in a second. So we've got the recommendation on page 13 and 14. Okay. I think, Councillor Campbell, what you want is and Daljit has just confirmed, is that we will bring everything back as in the design, so that it can be looked at as one, as phase 2. Is that okay, Councillor Campbell? So we look at phase 2 design as a whole. Yeah. So do we have a proposer and seconder for the recommendation with the addition of, we come back the affordable units and we look at phase 2 as a whole? Okay, so Councillor Campbell moved and Councillor Finnegan second. Okay, members, can we move to the vote then? Show of hands. So those in favour of that proposal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that's everybody in favour of the proposal. Thank you, members. I just want to clarify. Thank you, Councillor Jones, who's just... Sorry, Councillor Jones is subbing on today's panel. He has been delayed. So thank you for coming along. I just want for clarification just to confirm that Councillor Jones has now entered the room and is attending the meeting. Okay, so that motion is carried. Do you need to summarise anything else on that? Are we...
No, I think...
No, we're okay? Yeah. Okay. Right. That's been summed up. We need no further clarification. What I'm going to do now, members and officers, is take a short comfort break so that officers can change over for the next item, and we can rearrange things. So we'll take a short break for 10 minutes and then we will move on to agenda item 8, please. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're now moving on to agenda item 8. But before we do that, we have had quite a significant changeover of officers for the planning applications. So for officers who didn't introduce themselves at the start of the meeting, can I just ask you to introduce yourselves now?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Adam Ward. I'm the team leader from Southwest Team.
Matthew Walker, Principal Planner, South and West Team. I'm the case officer leading on the application.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Bartlett. I'm Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Rena Saran, Climate and Energy Officer.
Afternoon, Simon Clare, the Environmental Health Advisor to the Planning Department.
And subbing at half-time, I'm Philippa Plumtree-Varley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to panel on this application.
Excellent introduction, thank you. And also Councillor Jones, who's now been able to join.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for being late. Apologies as always. Councillor Raymond Jones from Horsforth. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. So we will now move on to agenda item 8, which is the hybrid planning application for partial redevelopment and surroundings at Leeds United Football Club, Elland Road. So I will now hand over to Matt, who's going to introduce this item for us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is this scheme's fourth visit to City Plans panel by virtue of 2 pre-application discussions, a position statement, and then we are now here today for determination. I'm sure members are very, very well versed in what the application proposals are and what they constitute. However, I'm just briefly set out. I'm going to take you through the presentation, so any members who are not at the previous meetings are fully aware of the discussions that have taken place previously in this forum. And then what I'm also then looking to do is work through the outstanding matters, planning matters that were raised in October. And then I'll hand over to Gillian, who will deal with the highways matters, and then we'll come back to me at the end to give you any verbal updates and a summary. Members are advised that this scheme deals with a lot of complicated and diverse planning issues, many of which the advice that we are given is dictated by a number of specialists that work within the council. A number of those officers are here today. We have officers from environmental protection, flood risk, climate change, design. So if there are any specific questions to officers, we have the expertise in the room to answer those questions. For brevity, I'm going to try and move through the first few slides at pace. I'll make you aware that a number of the slides contain smaller version images as a summary of what was discussed back in October. However, we do have a separate deck with full-size plans should we need to refer back to any of those. So without further ado, I'll start with, we will if this thing works. There we go. Lewis, it's not working, mate. There we go. Thank you. So we'll start with a recap. In October, I gave you the background to the stadium and detailed the nature of its incremental evolution since football was first introduced to Elland Road in 1902. I then explained to you the details of the proposals and the vital statistics of the development are set out at section 4 of the report that you have in front of you, and for members' reference and recollection should you need it. I can confirm today the parameters of the planning application have not changed since the October meeting, and therefore it remains the case that the application you are now being asked to determine is a request for full planning permission to redevelop the West Stand, often referred to as the John Charles Stand, and a request to grant outline planning permission for the North Stand, which is more commonly known as the Revy Stand or the COP. In totality, and over both phases, the scheme would increase stadium capacity to 53,000, thereby representing an increase of circa 15,500 seats. The slide on screen illustrates the 2 phase boundaries, with phase 1 outlined in purple and phase 2 related to the North Stand, hatched in red. And here's just a quick reminder of the before and after images shown in October. And a reminder of the section drawing that I identified to you as being useful in comparing the scale of the proposals against the Jack Charlton East Stand on Lowfields Road, which is currently the dominant structural feature of the stadium. I then explained how the overall design approach proposed by the club and supported by officers is for the adaptations to realise a stadium of 4 distinct but linked stands which express themselves as having individual character for reasons of cultural and historical significance to the city, rather than trying to create a unified wrapped bowl type stadium of more modern appearance. I then took members through the functions of the new West Stand by their individual floors. And I also gave you an explanation of the justification of the proposed design in terms of achieving appropriate accreditations for the hosting of international sporting events and improving the fan experience within a relatively antiquated stadium environment as judged against modern standards, but preserving the spectator experience, which is world-renowned as being a merit of Elland Road. I provided you with an explanation about the new away coach parking facilities. Anybody who was on the site visit earlier on today, you will have had the current away fan transit route identified to you as a comparison. And also detailed the meanwhile community compatible use of the area as a multi-use sports facility for non-match days. And I also provided you with details of the process officers and the club went through in assessing the townscape impacts, including assessing impacts of the city's heritage assets in line with our statutory duties. They concluded that in design and townscape terms, the proposal should be reported on their merits, and as a result of the clearly identified planning benefits, which for members' benefit are again set out in this report at section 12.8. I provided you with an overview of the proposals in terms of public safety and wind safety and climate change considerations. These issues are readdressed in full at sections 12.4 of the report, and I set out our position that the proposals can be reported in all those respects. In my report and presentation in October, and again in the report before you, I provide you with details of the outline component of the scheme, including how matters will be conditioned in the event of an approval and in terms of the different phases. I advise members that the sustainability approach for the North Stand is the same as that of the new West Stand, in that the existing structure would be retained and overlaid, and a new tier would be erected above and as an overlap of the existing structure. And in my presentation in October, and within the current officer report at sections 12.1 and 12.7, I set out the overall climate change credentials of the proposals, of which this proposed reuse of structure will only be one component to be considered by the panel in terms of those broader sustainability merits. In the prior presentation in reporting, I have advised members these credentials should be considered by the panel, but only alongside the sustainability benefits which also arise from the substantial gear shift in the club's transport strategy promoted by this application, and which you will be detailed on today. The details of this will be covered off far more eloquently than I have covered by Gillian shortly. And that concludes my recap, so I'll now walk you through the issues identified by members and officers as requiring further attention following the position statement in October, and then I'll hand over to Gillian. So the first and probably most significant of these is the issue of residential amenity, and I'll start with the officer assessment and conclusions on this subject. In relation to a number of nearby households to the south of the existing stadium complex. There's a full written appraisal of all of this assessment set out at 12.5 of the report, but to refresh members and advise any members who are previously unaware on this issue. Sorry, I've just moved the slide on by accident, so apologies. Elland Road includes a number of residential houses, which, unlike most but not all properties along Heathgrove or Heath Mount, either face the site directly or angled to it, but in relevant proximity. The street contains 4 sets of semi-detached pairs. By dint of the proposed stadium layout, officers consider impacts from the physical mass of the proposed development will be felt most keenly at the yellow and blue border houses on the screen, and to a certain amount of detrimental effects, particularly at the blue property. In October, I discussed the benefits of the new stadium envelope in helping to mitigate noise outputs from match events. Officers concluded and advised you that despite the increase in capacity, the completed development should see noise outputs be less keenly felt in the area in the immediacy of the stadium, particularly around Elland Road and the Heaths, noting a reduction in the darker shade of red to Heath Grove and a drift of the denser noise output over the easterly direction as a result of the taller West Stand deflecting the noise. So just to be comprehensive, and something that we didn't put this slide up for you previously, just to confirm it is the same or a very similar scenario as regards to concert noise, bearing in mind that the proposal includes a request for permission to have 8 such events a year. So for members' benefit and to be comprehensive and as clear as possible at this decision stage, the same conclusions can be drawn from concert noise as is shown on the screen. And again, I would add we do have our environmental health officer here if you have any specific questions around this. There's little discernible change in noise receipt in the wider residential areas. sound outputs seem to fall more keenly to areas of vacant land or public open spaces in this situation. There are clear reductions in noise impacts to those properties in the immediacy of the stadium's southwestern corner. And the diagrams I just showed you showing distribution must also be considered alongside the existing context in terms of noise, which is a separate exercise than simply modelling the spread of that noise. Now, the noise report does this, that's been submitted, and concludes benefits for 2 properties sampled in the immediacy of the stadium's southern edge. So in our assessment overall, we've balanced that concluded benefit carefully with the projected impacts from the physical changes in the massing of the stadium, which I will come on to now. The slide on screen shows the new west stand and southwestern corner arrangement and its relationship to Ellen Road and the road properties I've just mentioned. Now, the loss of a view, I will reiterate, is not a material planning consideration, but we've got to have due regard to whether a new building is unduly dominant. You can hopefully see that the houses in question do not look directly onto proximate walling, but into the area around the current gated entrance to the stadium at that corner. This image is taken from the daylight and sunlight report, so it's not distinctly linked to this specific issue. However, it's useful in illustrating the degree of change that would be proposed, particularly in the area that you can see there with the cream-coloured circle and the most affected property there with the red circle next to it. This image is here to inform you of the current vista of available outlook from the properties I've just mentioned, mostly across vacant airspace looking out from the houses towards the north and the northwest. And here we've done a quick graph to try and demonstrate to you how the new stadium footprint brings much taller walling closer to the back edge of Ellen Road. Now, that's a substantial change in the character of the stadium at this area, noting the yellow circle being the area where currently there is no building presently, and also showing that a degree of outlook would be retained to the right-hand property in the picture as the new building steps, but less so to the left-hand property where the red circle is located. And here's a reminder of that existing relationship and separation. I wasn't on the site visit this morning, unfortunately, but my understanding is that members who were attending have been within this area and taken a look for themselves. Now, it's not possible to provide a rendered front-on view that clearly demonstrates the degree of changes anticipated from the 2 properties. However, we can illustrate that proposed degree of change for you today without the need for too much mental gymnastics and using the resources that we have available to us with the planning application. So the image on screen, you can see the yellow circle is above the corner of the stadium where the degree of change is known to be the greatest. And the image now on screen shows that the outlook from the property most severely impacted upon would incur a marked degree of change in their outlook. Officers have considered this as indisputable and have clearly acknowledged the impact in our prior reporting to you and our current report. I've also advised the lack of any clear adopted development plan policy which deals with assessment of this specific relationship and this development type. I've done that within the report, and I've also mentioned that to you previously in October. And I've also addressed to you that planning law does not require every single and specific issue raised in objections to be fully resolved in a decision, but we've got to properly consider these and use the decision taker to take a view on that, and we have to investigate any means of mitigation where appropriate. And I recall in October we were requested to go away and look at securing as much mitigation as we can for residential amenity impacts as possible. I was very, very clear that the design of the stadium in this area is set. There's no way to manifest a change in the design of the stand. It's a fixed proposition, and that is largely by reasons of the need to maintain the viewing envelopes required to achieve the appropriate stadium accreditations. Prior to the application being submitted, officers are aware that the facade that you can see there just adjacent to the cream-coloured circle has had some revisions done to it, i.e. a lot of glazing has been removed on there. And as regards the impact of the property that you can see in red, officers will be, in the event of an approval, very carefully considering CCTV locations and such like to maintain privacy. So the measures that can be taken were ironed out very early in the design stage and prefaced to an application being put in. So this is the proposition, and it's not easily, as I said to you in October, the impact can't be remedied by simple mitigation or revisions to the actual design of the stadium. In the absence of a specific policy, however, And following on from a clear direction on this issue from members, I now provide some contextual analysis for members to consider on how officers are justifying our position of support for the proposals on this matter, based on not just this site's geography, but also having some regard to more broader national range of stadia, set close either to traditional residential settings or Muslim residential areas. So between ourselves and between our officers and the applicants, we've to quote Jeff Stelling, we've gone round the grounds. And we've sorry, Pippa beat me to the first football pun, so I'm already 1-0 down. So we took a range, and of those, there's quite a broad range and diversity in the relationships between traditional housing stock and established stadiums. Obviously, people mostly aware the majority of football stadiums in the country at one time or other were based in very tight urban grain environments around the working class communities. That's no different to Elland Road. Albeit the stadium was technically there before a lot of the housing. We know that these things, as I mentioned to you in previous presentations, have grown up in tandem together. But there are some examples where we think lend themselves to being suitable for comparison. And of the ones that are highlighted, we then distilled further down into those, and we've got some very precise examples to give you now. So as we go around the grounds here, we can see a similar scenario at Charlton there. So Charlton Athletic in the top left-hand corner, there is precisely the same level of separation between that stand and the houses, as is the case with the properties along Elland Road, set at 27 metres. At Goodison Park, there is a vastly reduced range. Goodison Park remains, despite the New Hill Dickinson Stadium, remains an active stadium for Everton women's team. I'm very pleased about that because I quite like Goodison Park. It's a great place to go. And that relationship is to 11 metres. Crystal Palace in the bottom left there has a separation distance of 26 metres. And Anfield in the bottom right corner there, again, 27 metres. So, again, the same as would be retained between the houses along Elland Road, and there's similar nature structures of comparable height, scale, massing and character. And just to reinforce and perhaps labour the point a little, we've further examples on the screen of some other similar stadia ranging between 18 metres at Hillsborough in the bottom right, St James's Park at the top right at 23 metres, and then relating to newer forms of residential development than the other cases I'm showing you, down at Carrow Road in the bottom left corner there, that's 26 metres, and that's obviously been the stadium predates the vertical residential that you can see on the left-hand side of the picture. So clearly the planning authority there has considered that level of separation to be acceptable on its merits for that application. Sheffield Wednesday again. Sorry, just bear with me. I've already given you that one. 26 metres again at Blackburn Rovers at the top left. So that's the national picture. And I'm just going to go back a second because I don't have a slide for this, and I apologise. But in terms of the local context, and this is in the report and is very clearly expressed in the report, whilst there is no precise comparator for somewhat obvious reasons, there's not many opportunities to pop a new stadium next to residential in the city. The report addresses known and consented gaps and separation distances within the inner area of the city, in areas of generally similar character to the Elland Road area, mixed use, commercial, residential. Now, these are advised to members at 12.5.1 of the report. And these distances that we've accepted as a planning authority in and of themselves have mostly been set by looking at the established and in many cases historic urban grains in their respective localities. Again, the 27-metre separation distance in the application exceeds all but one of the consented schemes that are set out for you in the report, which is the Climate Innovation Village. But this in itself is still a good comparator at 29 metres, being only 2 metres different. But also addressing a very, very severe land level change and changing the character of housing between two-storey residential properties and much taller vertical residential at the site's boundary to, I think it's East Street. So again, we're in the same ballpark as the retained distance. And then some of the more established residential areas, that gap reduces massively to between 10 and 17 metres between buildings in the majority of the cases, just taken as an average. So officers are concluding in this case that the massing, whilst the marks change, and we have to accept that, it's a very clear change, can't really be justified as an issue of refusal on its own. The submitted daylight and sunlight assessment very clearly makes clear that the retained levels of daylight and sunlight to habitable rooms and habitable areas at the property remains above guidance figures within BRE. That shouldn't be determinative. BRE is a bit of it sometimes works to our benefit, sometimes works against us, because it's modelled on relating two-storey forms of development to two-storey forms of development. So it's not an exact science, but what we can say is that we're comfortable as officers that the property would have suitable daylight receipt, so that the impact from the increased proximity wouldn't then further be compounded by an awful lot of loss of light. The properties in question are dual aspect. The stadium is proposed due north of the application site, so there wouldn't be significant shadow cast from the development by dint of the geographical arrangement of these buildings. So we really now need to move on to now we've parked those. Clearly, with this development proposal, there are a number of residential amenity issues that will need to be managed through what will potentially, in the event of an approval, be a lengthy and somewhat environmentally intrusive build process. And we have to make that very, very clear today. This is a one-off proposition for the city, and it's going to be a noisy build, and it's going to be very, very near residential, and there will be disruption from that. But as a planning authority, it's incumbent on us to look at whether what we've got the mechanisms in place to mitigate those impacts as far as possible. Now, a number of the objections that we received have been quoting chapter and verse to us on a number of legal standards and such like that the objectors consider are entirely relevant. In my previous reports to you, and again at the end of this report, I have addressed the point that we must look at this as a planning authority, and we must look at it based on our adopted planning policies and the aims of those policies. If other legislation exists, it exists. I'm here today to say to those objectors, we hear you and we see you on this point. The planning authority is well versed in managing difficult, noisy and long-term residential builds. We have expertise in environmental protection and highways that assist us with that. And we have a range of conditions that we have been readily agreed by the applicant on this point, and an approach to deal with this that will include liaison, that will include having a contact with the club for the most desperately affected properties. What we can't sit here today and do is guarantee to you this will be resolved by this specific means, by moving you out, by reinforcing by these. We can't sit here and say that today, because this needs to be calculated out in the medium term. But what we can say is that we have robust enough conditions to secure what is needed to minimise that disruption as far as is possible. And it won't be 100%. But everybody around the table on both sides will do what they can for the local community in that regard, given the importance of this. There will be the service, I don't mind saying the service have resourced me as a case officer to look at this project in the longer term than we originally anticipated, in light of mainly having a steady and consistent approach on both sides, recognisable people that the community can get to know and that can liaise with. So that I'll just speak to that point at the moment. So our advice to officers is, whilst we can't guarantee a perpetually harmonious environment for local residents during any build, we can assure you that the planning permission as drafted and is before you today and is recommended to you contains the robust mechanisms to manage the impacts to any relevant best practice standards. And these are entirely consistent with how the city currently manages some of its larger and more significant city centre builds. Granted, there will need to be some slight adaptation to this, but we already have a framework in place to deal with this issue, and the conditions reflect that. So the drafted, but in terms of wider residential amenity impacts raised, not just by objectors, but that we need to work through to be comprehensive. The drafted planning permission formalises and secures management and future engagement in a number of other areas around public safety, match day management, and demonstrates and secures a long-term commitment to future adaptations to these regimes as and when they're identified as needed. And that includes input from the Safety Advisory Group, West Yorkshire Police, and other external stakeholders as well as leaning into our own internal expertise and those that the club have got as well. And one thing that this process has taught is that we have a lot of very skilled people on both sides who are working collaboratively with each other, and I need to make that very, very clear. So to sum up on the issue of residential amenity, officers fully acknowledge the proposals represent a marked degree of change to the outlook from some of the nearby properties. Our recommendation today to members is that in the absence of a specific policy on the issue, following the above assessment, which is well reasoned, the detailed nature of the objections that we've received, and based on the considered advice of our professional consultees and specialist officers both in and outside of this authority, officers conclude that specific to residential amenity, the most affected instances, the proposals, whilst a change, are not so severe as to warrant a refusal of the planning application. Where impacts occur, they can be mitigated. They will have been, or they will be, manifesting the changes already undertaken early in the design process that I just mentioned, or secured through the conditions and the legal agreement. And therefore, in isolation of the broader planning balance that you're going to need to be undertaking today, on this specific issue, officers consider the proposed development is acceptable. This slide speaks to comments received and made by members in October and sets out the benefits in terms of stadium accreditation and what an improved Ellen Road Stadium would mean. An improved Ellen Road Stadium will form part of the 2035 bid for the Women's World Cup. And again, this speaks to substantial benefits in the city region in terms of the local economy, social and cultural engagement opportunities in the council's best city vision, particularly around women's football and opening the game up further in the city region. The scheme includes what will become a club foundation run facility on site for use as a multi-use games area. To deliver these opportunities, the stadium needs to hit its appropriate accreditations, so we can broaden that scope and experience and interaction with women's football in the city. And officers, notwithstanding comments made by members, and these are valid comments, officers have looked at this issue beyond the scope of the operation of Leeds United Football Club. It is very much Leeds United Football Club's decision on how they run their women's football establishment. And I think members were very, very clear on what they think they should be aspiring to, as we've discussed this twice previously. But we've zoomed out a little bit and we've looked at it more in terms of what we can do to attract a more enduring legacy than just dealing with that one specific issue on women's football. The upstream benefits in terms of economics, the opportunities for better social improvement that would arise from us hosting a major sporting event at the stadium in 2035. So we consider this to be a substantial merit of the development, but it speaks to the issues that were raised by members previously. Oh, just to clarify on that point as well, the club obviously have their own ambitions in terms of improvement and qualification for the higher tier European football tournaments. That accreditation would allow us to take part in the highest tier tournaments that will hopefully be available to the football club in the coming years. In terms of the community legacy, this slide sets out what a grant of approval would mean in terms of legacy for the local community and speaks to a number of benefits in terms of the management of operations around the stadium, around the provision of jobs, both in the short, medium and long term, skills provisions that would go hand in hand with that, with our jobs and skills team, secure through the Section 106 legal agreement. And these are fully detailed throughout the report before you today and summarised in brief headlines on the screen. I'll come back to the point that we do have a specialist officer in the room if required. Members asked us to look again and provide some assurances around flood risk, particularly around the issue of Wortley Beck. Officers have stepped to that and advised that on the basis of the information that we have and our own specialist advice, we can tell you the proposals would not be adversely affected by the watercourse in question. Now, this slide just prefaces a response to members' comments and questions around exploration of off-site planting provisions and speaks back to some well-mannered criticism of the proposed landscape scheme at the October Plans panel meeting. The slide on screen revisits the same plans I provided in that presentation as illustration to you there just for reference, and just remind you of the principles driving the proposed layouts of these external areas. Now, speaking to the point that was raised about off-site planting contributions, there isn't an appropriate mechanism to deal with that within the envelope of this planning application, and I must be very, very clear on that point. There is no adopted policy basis for this at the moment, and we as officers cannot directly relate a negative impact to need to be mitigated in kind to make the development acceptable in this case. Now, notwithstanding that, the club are in discussions with the local authority away from the planning process on a number of other interventions around the city that are not linked to planning. These speak to route improvement, wayfinding improvements and such like. The planning permission has its figures against it in terms of Section 106. These have all been sense checked and we consider these are appropriate to make the development acceptable in planning terms. But to make this a robust decision, we don't consider that we could adapt that in any way to cater for an off-site planting sum. So I just need to be very, very clear on that. I'm not sure whether that was the express intention of the request at the last meeting or not, but for good probity and good decision making, I'll just make that point clear today. I will also come back to the point that was raised as well, that things seem a little bit sparse on the plan. I don't think it's helped really by the vast array of Fullerton Park being shown on the retained plan there, because that doesn't help. So the panel discussion drew out comments around not only the off-site planning contribution, but also seeking improvements to that landscaping layout. Now, this area of public realm proposed within the stadium has to work incredibly hard and in a number of different functions. And its principal function, I think we all have to bear this in mind and just come back to this point, is a space to move high volumes of people through efficiently and safely to attend sporting events. That's its principal function. It can do this two ways, either by management regime or by forcing the point through built interventions in its layout, or a combination of the two. In simple terms, if permission is granted, the planning process will then move to a details stage, and this will involve multi-agency input simultaneously around effectively what is the same plan, but with a number of different agencies and officers trying to seek the best outcome from that space in terms of security, planting, public transit, safety. We at the moment, we have this locked down through the proposed conditions that you'll see at Appendix A in the report. So this will be revisited. It will be basically formed based on the plan that you see before you today because of the site constraints. Those are known. Those are known knowns. But we can only dictate the finalised amount of planting really when the multi-agency approach is concluded and we see what's left over at the end. Because there's got to be a technical interface between built interventions such as security measures, for example, standoff distances to planting to make that show that planting endure. So we can't sit here today and say, yeah, we can definitely get you more planting in, members. But members know what our adopted policies require us, and we frequently sit in front of this panel to say, can you tell us that we need to go away and try harder on that? So that message is very much with us, that we will be pushing as much planting within this site as is physically possible that does not prejudice the operation of the area. And we're also doing that with one mind to the wider master plan proposals. So I'm doing a bit of future gazing, but we're going to potentially have a scenario where that becomes a throughfare, where that links up to a mixed use development to the left hand side of the plan there. And so it's going to have a third function, not only as a public place to dwell, not only as a moving space in terms of the transit of supporters, but it's then going to end up being a public route as well. So that's another thing that we're going to have to factor in at some point. So we need to try and future-proof things as well. So in summary, no, I can't sit here today and say that is the greatest landscaping layout I've ever seen. But that flexibility at this stage in the process is a merit of the application, I think, rather than being to its detriment. So we have those conditional controls in place. They're robust and they're in the back of the report should you need to have further reassurance on that point. I'll hand over to Gillian now for the main event. Thank you.
Okay. Great, thank you, Matt. So just as introduction, so we got the planning application in last July following a pre-app process, and during that pre-app process we did identify that there was a shortfall in the information that was available at that time for us to fully understand what the baseline position was at the club. Due to the timing of the football season, we had the application submitted prior to all of the new survey work being done, but that survey work was undertaken in August, and then we got our initial updated transport assessment in October, and we've been working through and updating from that point on. So I'm just going to run through the slides. So the main aims then that we have been working towards are these three aims: that we're looking to get significant mode shift away from the car and towards more sustainable travel modes, that we want no increase in on-street parking around the stadium, and that we want no significant increase in highway congestion, and we need a better managed network. So we've been working with the club proactively to work on those three areas. So I'm going through the presentation in order. So in relation to mode shift, so you can't really read it, but this slide looks at person trip generation by mode, main mode of travel, and it shows existing. Yeah, so it's for the existing and for phases 1 and 2. So phase 1 being the west stand, phase 2 being the north stand. It should be noted that many of the main modes don't actually get the spectators to the ground. So there will be a final leg trip as well beyond the main mode of travel. And then to meet the mode shift objectives, the mode splits are as follows. Has that moved on? There. So this shows that we have an existing driver mode share total of 32.1%. That's just adding up car driver and park and ride driver. And then we have a proposed driver mode share of 27.3%. So that's a 4.8 percentage point reduction in car driver to the ground. And that's for phase 1 and for phase 2 that is being proposed. The existing car occupancy has been taken as 2 people per vehicle. So there is a lot of opportunity through the travel plan to increase the average car occupancy levels and thereby reduce total car numbers. But this leads then to an increase in cars being driven for phase 1 of 755 additional vehicles. But most of these additional vehicles will be accommodated away from the ground, with increased use of the park and ride sites at Temple Green and Sturton, of which we've got at least another 600 spaces being made available. And we've also got 1,200 spaces being made available at the White Rose Office Park. So it's fully accommodated by that parking away from the ground. For phase 2, however, the increase is over 2,000 additional vehicles from the current position. So we will come back to that one. Still looking at the mode share then, the largest individual increase in mode is expected by rail, and we have a 5.7% percentage change, which takes us from 12.8 up to 18.5% of people with their main mode of travel by rail. And this accommodates about 1/3 of the increase in spectator travel, with the rest being split as shown previously. So while specific targets have been provided per mode, our main aim is to achieve the target to increase sustainable travel modes and reduce car usage, especially car driver numbers. Just to say that we are also considering the staff around the ground, and that we do have targets here to reduce car driver mode share. So from 82 to 68% for Leeds United Football Club staff, and then from 32% down to 22% for their casual staff on match days. And measures to promote sustainable travel to their staff are included in the travel plan. This is just a summary of public transport bus services that are available around the ground. Just to say that the PR1, which is the park and ride service for Elland Road itself, doesn't operate on match days and times of day if it's an evening match. And also that we're aware that the 51, 52, 55, 55C services are diverted away from Elland Road at least an hour before kick-off now, and that's likely to potentially extend slightly, depending on the timing of the Elland Road closure, which I will come on to. I've then got, this plan shows the match day special services that are currently operated, and this includes the R2, which is the yellow on the map, if you can see it, R3 and R4, which are just single bus services. And then we've got the routes of the coaches that come from Temple Green and Sturton Park and Ride sites. So we've got, missed that one. Sorry. I got the wrong button. Is that the right one? No, that's a different one. Gosh, I went through. That was it. Yeah, I'll leave that pointer alone. So the orange and the purple are the ones from the park and ride sites. The yellow is the R2. We've got, I think the R3 is the dark blue and the R4 is the green. So we've then, what's not shown on here is the fact that going forwards, so we've got the significant increase coming in the R2 and in the park and ride services. We've also got new services coming from White Rose Office Park parking and from the White Rose rail station when that opens, which is expected in a couple of years' time. So this is bus and coach parking, and the slide shows the arrangements around the stadium. The R2, R3, R4 all make use of the bus and coach station, which is shown in green on that plan. And also in that bus and coach station, we have the home supporter coaches. And that bus station is managed on behalf of the Combined Authority. The park and ride shuttle coaches from Temple Green and Sturton, they currently pick up and drop off on Bobby Collins Way. But because of the significant increase in usage and therefore increase in numbers of coaches, they are now proposed to pick up and drop off in that pale green area, which is the LCC land fronting onto Elland Road. So that will require a change in route via Junction 1, where they currently come via Junction 2. We've then got the away supporter coaches, which Matt's already mentioned, but that's the dark blue or black, almost black area that's shown on there. And that's moving from 15 coaches capacity up to 25 coaches. And then the new shuttles that I've mentioned from White Rose will stack on Bobby Collins Way. So we've done full assessments of capacity needs to meet the mode share splits, and they can all be accommodated around and about. Sorry, the plan then also, I'll just point this out, is that the top one, so I don't change all the things again. Yeah. Can't get that to work, sorry. Is it there? There. Just up here, we're also looking at a private hire pick-up and drop-off zone. So it will just be made available and we'll direct people to that. And I'll come back to the reason why at a later point. So just moving on. So this is the bus and coach station layout that we've got. I've got two maps of this. So it's just showing pre-event how the vehicles access the bus and coach park, and then similarly post-event how they exit from it. I was asked on site about the numbers. So we've got capacity for 18 minibuses and 16 coaches for home supporters, and then 35 buses that cover the R2, R3, R4 services in that space, which is sufficient from our assessments. In terms of the home supporter coaches, we have agreed with the club that if there is growth in home supporter coaches, that we will look at pre-booking of parking away from this area, probably in car parks A and B. Okay. We are also, there is a condition coming round to, just to go back to the entrance one, at the moment, the access point that comes off from Lowfields Road, so the green arrow one, is showing us to come into the bus and coach station from a position that's currently a no entry sign. So we are just reversing that as part of the highway works. And there will be a bus station audit, which has been requested through WICA, so that will come along. This shows the indicative wayfinding strategy. So what we've got are two significant routes from the city centre. One's purple, one's a yellowy colour, that come to the stadium. And then we've got the route, pinky colour, that's going out towards White Rose Office Park and White Rose Rail Station. They will be, so there is a condition and a Section 106 contribution towards the wayfinding. And that will be a piece of work that will be undertaken to upgrade significantly the signage around those routes and any particular deficiencies on those routes that can be covered through that piece of work. So it will include walk times. It will be very clear on the route alignment as well. You can also see on there that there will be work done to look at the routes up Lowfields Road, which is green, and down Wesley Street as well. In terms of those routes, we do also have some Section 106 proposals for CCTV cameras, and we are expecting through condition that there will be significantly increased marshalling on some of those routes, especially nearer into the ground, but away from the ground, for pedestrian safety reasons. So that was aim 1. Aim 2 is about no increase in on-street parking around the ground. So as part of the survey work, there was a full spectator survey undertaken, asking about main mode of travel and those further travel legs. So for spectators travelling by car, it was established whether they were driver or passenger, and where they parked. So that was either location of car park or on-street parking zone. And the zones mainly are the numbered ones in black, in relation to the on-street parking. In addition, to corroborate that, a number of drone surveys were undertaken on match days and non-match days for comparison. And all additional parking that came from that is assumed to be football stadium parking. So this is the drone survey data, and in the column that says difference, you can see where the main areas of on-street parking are taking place around the ground, and we've got them in order of the numbers. Zone 5 is Gelded Road, Lowfields Road. Zone 10, Beeston. Zone 6, Holbeck. Zone 11, Beeston Hill. Zone 1, Farnley and Lower Wortley. So in that order, they are the main areas taking the on-street parking. And as expected, the further away you go from the stand, the lower the numbers. In total, we have 6,071 vehicles parking on street associated with the ground. So this just shows the updated parking assumptions in terms of on-street and off-street parking, in terms of where all those vehicles are. You'll see that the existing total demand for car parking is 12,717 vehicles. For phase 1, then that increases to 13,472 vehicles after applying the mode shift. And for phase 2, that figure is 15,071 vehicles. For a revised transport assessment, we'll actually review the situation once phase 1 is operational, to assess whether additional off-street parking will or won't be required for phase 2, or whether increased car occupancy and increased mode shift negates the need for any additional parking. This just shows the existing car parks around the ground, and we've got, so just so that everyone knows where we are. So car park A, car park B, and then you've got the park and ride. This is Fullerton Park, and the area at the front was the coach parking zone. And it's not shown on the map because it's not parking specifically, but then you've got the bus and coach area in there. Okay, so in terms of disabled parking, the parking on Lowfields Road will be lost during match days as part of the development, because of the security measures that will be and the road closures that will be in place. There are some additional parts laid out at disabled parking bays that will be going into the park and ride car park. But overall, the club will commit to maintaining over 400 accessible spaces for blue badge holders around the ground, and they'll be retained in the future phases of development. So parking spaces around the ground will reduce by 332 spaces in phase 1 in this area, and a further 150 spaces in phase 2. That's to actually build the North Stand itself. And as I've said, this is offset by additional provision at White Rose Office Park and the park and ride sites. Hopefully that just, yeah, I think I've just covered that one. So aim 3 then. So the TA provided 3 transit models of 3 junctions on the surrounding strategic road network, which is with the M621 junctions 1 and 2 and the M62 junction 28 Tingley Roundabout junction. A 4th junction, which was the M621 junction 5 at Tunstall Road, coming onto Dewsbury Road, was also reviewed after observations of queuing on the main line from that junction. So, and that just shows the junctions. So junction 5 is under the under here basically. So it's just the one that comes in off Dewsbury Road, but then you've got junctions 1 and 2 and junction 28 shown. The local highway network wasn't modelled in the same way, but we had observations from officers of Leeds City Council, West Yorkshire Police and National Highways driving round to establish key points of congestion on the local highway network and the causes of them. National Highways were satisfied that a sensitivity test of the worst case scenario on the strategic road network would not lead to any severe congestion issues, and the main concern was around queuing back to the M1 bifurcation. So they were happy that that would not happen, and similarly they were happy that any queuing occurring on their network was within the 50-mile-per-hour speed limit area, and that there was adequate forward visibility to the back of the queue. So in principle, then they were saying that they were happy with that. They do, however, so they and Matt will cover this, but they have indicated they're happy to lift their holding recommendation, subject to specific planning conditions, which do require some more detailed analysis work prior to the above ground commencement of the development. Then the local highway authority has agreed the following strategy to deal with the local network, which addresses some of the existing congestion issues that we've got, specifically around exit blocking from junctions, and then allows capacity to grow the spectator numbers. So the strategy is to spread the journey arrival times, and the club's doing that by extending the hospitality opening hours and improving the offer at the ground. It's to keep traffic moving pre-closure on Elland Road, to prevent key junctions from blocking, to improve the car park entry rates by pre-booking and faster payment processes, to improve awareness of events and using pre-event diversion signing to warn others to plan their journey. The closure of Elland Road pre-match that's proposed is put in place mainly for the safety of pedestrians, but it is also expected to reduce the level of use of M621 Junction 2, which again will assist in some of that capacity for the motorway junction. And then there will be improved UTMC camera coverage and telecoms around the ground, and updated and increased number of match day signal plans for about 30 traffic signalised junctions in the wider area that's under the influence of people arriving for the football. This plan just shows the extents of a proposed red route on Elland Road. So the red route effectively prevents people from picking up and dropping off, except apart from the areas where it is explicitly allowed, i.e. buses in bus stops, taxis and taxi ranks, and any essential loading. That detail will be worked through. It will be consulted upon as part of the condition. We are also intending to suspend one of the bus stops 3 hours pre-match to aid traffic flow, and that's the one just beyond the Wesley Street junction, because it's been observed to take quite a bit of capacity away from the flow through there. But there is still a bus stop just to the other end. We saw it this morning on site, that will be in use until the road closure goes in. So I've just laid out basically the highways and transportation mitigation that is being proposed as part of this scheme that covers off the 3 areas that I've gone through. I won't go through all the details, but I can come back to it if people want to go through it in more detail. And then just in conclusion, we've done an awful lot of detailed work on this scheme to ensure that the existing situation and future impacts of the expansion are fully understood, and that they will work in relation to capacity of the road network and capacity of the sustainable travel network as well. A risk-based road safety assessment has been carried out, and all identified issues of concern have been addressed and mitigated to an acceptable level. The improved management of the car parks and management of the local highway network will lead to consequential improvements to the strategic road network, which in turn facilitates the capacity to support the increase in spectator numbers. The introduction of a travel plan coordinated by the club, with the introduction of travel demand management software, will enable the promotion of all modes of travel in one space, and Leeds United will also be part funding a member of Leeds City Council staff to work with the club on the implementation and monitoring of the travel plan. So the work carried out gives all involved the information to be able to talk to providers in relation to potential of new bus or coach services going forwards. So collaborative working's been extremely important, particularly in recent weeks, to get us here. The monitoring processes, the mitigation measures identified, and the positive intent from the applicant to continue with this collaborative approach going forward will be hugely beneficial and indeed critical in enabling the club and Leeds City Council to agree joint solutions to any issues or opportunities that might arise going forward. I'll hand back to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. So there are a number, as you would expect with a 100-odd page report and a fast-moving situation, there are a number of items to update you on to bring you bang up to date to about 2 hours ago. Firstly, to advise members, on the 23rd of December, Councillor Scopes formally withdrew the objections that are set out in the reports following the receipt of the new transport information that had been provided. Noting the officer recommendation box at the head of the report, which was drafted before Christmas, on Christmas Eve, Active Travel England wrote to the council to formally withdraw their objection based on the negotiations undertaken, subject to the use of conditions and obligations that are set out before you in the report. This, in effect, addresses one of the matters on which the request to defer and delegate is reported, and this matter is therefore resolved. However, there's one coming out of the box and there's one going in, which I will explain in a moment. A letter of support was received on the 30th of December from Councillor Jane Dowson on behalf of the Leeds United Supporters Advisory Board, representing thousands of fans and major supporter groups, and who unanimously support the planning application. The letter identifies benefits in terms of cultural, community, economic and regeneration benefits, the improvement of the city's international profile, inclusivity and sustainability. Yesterday, the Chamber of Commerce have provided a letter of support towards the proposals. The letter reaffirms the economic benefits of the proposals, amongst other benefits around the improvement of the stadium as a facility that the city can be proud of. And a further letter of support has been received from a member of the public around the same time, strongly related to the same theme. Since the report was authored, a letter of support from Leeds United Supporters Network expresses their strong support for the football club's proposals, as do the South Leeds Independent Supporters Group in a letter also received since the report went to press. There are clearly a lot of supporters groups. A further letter of objection has been received from a local resident in the locality. The matters raised thematically relate in their nature to the range of material considerations that we've already discussed and are set out in the report. The letter does go on to request members to seek to achieve appropriate controls on the basis of the amenity of occupiers, and I've already spoken to that point previously, particularly around construction management. And construction management is probably the headline item in that letter of objections. So I consider we've already given that issue an explanation. In terms of the prescribed conditions at Appendix A, we continue to refine that condition wording by the hour, as recently as this morning. And there is some absence of draft wording on a few matters in that table at the back as a result. There's some missing conditions regarding provision of dilapidation surveys, the setting back of gates from the public highway, securing the disabled parking provision, the submission of a safety and comfort mitigation scheme linked to any future improvements, and the travel planning process, with some further conditional controls also to go onto that list and agreed with the club around reviewing and refreshing of signage. Further conditions will be used to control the reprovision of car parking. All of the above lists that are not in Appendix A, we consider can work, will meet the tests in policy and national policy and guidance. We're in the process of agreeing the specific wording on those, and we are requesting our recommendation to defer and delegate, subject to us getting all of the conditions wrapped up and agreed. But I would consider that to be a formality at this stage. On those specific points. And then just speaking to the point about national highways, just to be very, very clear, obviously the way the timescales are structured with the authoring and submission of reports, there are some long lead-in times. So we had anticipated that the holding direction from National Highways had probably be lifted by now. We'd have the agreement on the conditions. We're not miles apart on any of that. We're just looking at the refinement of some wording at the moment with National Highways. As a result of the Christmas break, I'm afraid we're just not quite made it there, but we're expecting that agreement to come within the couple of days. So for the purposes of this report, I'm going to suggest to you members that into that top box, if you imagine Active Travel England has come out, National Highways goes in, but we are expecting resolution on that point in a couple of days, and we would not, in the event of an approval, be issuing a decision until those conditions are agreed and National Highways have removed that holding position on the application. So some of the conditions advised by National Highways that I've just spoken about, we're already anticipating, and they're included in Appendix A of the report, and others are currently being worked upon. These relate to traffic and event management plans, the provision of the micro-simulation modelling that Gillian mentioned, and modelling of some of the junctions onto the strategic network, amongst other things, and the provision of revised travel planning and transport statements at the phase 2 stage of the project, all consistent with the details that are in the appraisal of the report. So my apologies to you that there was that slight mismatch, but I hope that explains that point. So to conclude, I'm not proposing to take up much more of your time. You've heard a lot of us over a number of presentations. It's taken slightly longer than I think any of us would have liked. We had anticipated to be here in November, December time, but we're slightly late, but it's for good reason. There's been a substantial amount of analytical work done by a number of people in a number of specialisms within very, very tight, compact timescales. The club have an important milestone to achieve in their timeline, in that in order to facilitate a build around the football season, we are moving at pace in the event of you recommending you following our recommendation today, to get spades in the ground as quickly as possible on this one. Otherwise, they will miss the window that's available. And then there are obviously a number of things that flow from that around arranging funding and such like. So it's very, very important that we try and make as timely a decision as possible, but the right decision based on robust evidence, based on the right analysis. Both sides have worked incredibly hard, and it is not normally the place of an officer to come here and crow about our own activities, but a lot of people have worked really, really hard to bring this here today. So I will say no more about that, other than to say that on the balance of everything I've said today, in the previous presentations and all the relevant reporting that you've had, I advise members that your officers recommend a defer and delegate decision to grant planning permission subject to the resolution of the matters at the head of the report and those corrections I've just mentioned. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both, and thank you everybody for bearing with us through that report. We should have taken bets at the beginning on how many football references we could get into today's meeting. We're up to 2 so far. I know you were beaten. I know. That was an excellent one, though. Okay, so we have no speakers on this item, but we do have representatives from Leeds United here who are available should members have any questions of clarification on any technical points. So, bearing that in mind, I will move now to questions. I can see, Councillor Blackburn, you've got your hand up already. So I'm going to move to questions to officers from members. If you can indicate to me by raising your hand, and I will make a list. So I've got Councillor Blackburn, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Carlill, Councillor Gavani, Councillor Dye so far. Okay, I'll take you in that order. Councillor Blackburn first.
I've got to say, the aims of the travel plan are admirable. The devil, as I've always said with this, is in the detail of delivering it. And we've had and there's been bad experiences in the past where conditions haven't worked out as they were supposed to do. The issue is this: how are we going to get that shift of people changing modes? Regarding park and ride, what efforts, or it might be a club needs to answer, what efforts are being made to actually get people to the park and ride rather than coming and parking near the ground? On that, but I mean, basically, if it isn't achieved, if the travel plan isn't achieved, as plenty of people in the locality think it will not be, what are we going to do to alleviate this? I noticed in there it mentioned that there was some money available maybe for resident-only parking. Now, my memory as a Wortley councillor goes back to an application from the police force for the police station where money was available for something similar, and when it came up about doing and using that on the Dragons and the Kellets and now Whitehall Road, when that came up, the money that was available wasn't enough. And it wasn't enough because we was told at the time that every time you change dates of matches, you've got to put different dates up if you're going to just do it on match day. So are you sure there's enough money in the kitty to do that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the devil is in the detail. But we've got lots of measures in the travel plan. Leeds United are appointing a new member of staff to be a travel plan coordinator. That's a new role. They've never had anyone in that post in the past. So I think it's very exciting that we'll be able to work with them. As I say, that they're also, part funding a post in the council so that we can have that very close alliance going forwards and make sure that we are reviewing ongoing to see which measures are working, which aren't, and that dialogue will absolutely carry on to make sure that we see if there are any deficiencies in meeting the standards and what we can do to address them. So there's certainly the mechanism and the structure there. In terms of the measures, we're looking at significantly improved website information with travel demand management programs that will bring all areas of travel together so that people will be able to go to one place and know exactly what the options are for travel. They're looking at travel guides, mentioned the fan zone and the extension of the times, but then the walking routes, we've got extra cycle parking, so 120 cycle parking spaces are being proposed. We've also got funding for additional e-bike docks. We see now actually there's pretty good use of the e-bike system, so we're officially putting in a geofence area around there so that we can legally accommodate those extra bikes in there. I mean, all of the measures, there's measures in 12.3.34 in the report. So specifically around park and ride, there will be that use of park and ride in terms of the council is putting over 50% of those park and ride car parks towards this. The club will be reviewing with their contracts just in relation to that shuttle bus service and the increase in the numbers to make sure we can get them there. I think there is huge potential through the travel plan to get increased car occupancy, and the club will be going out. They've got all the ticket holder data in terms of their databases. They will be going out directly to fans, spectators, to be able to put those messages out there about do not, that they want to dissuade on-street parking. They want to dissuade like some of the bad neighbour issues that you get with people parking illegally around the ground as well, and clearly promote all these other opportunities for sustainable travel that there are available.
So I'm just going to bring Gary in as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to assist here as well. As Matt said a few minutes ago, this has been a very wide involvement across city development and certainly highways and transportation in terms of the analysis of this planning application. And my colleagues in traffic engineering have been heavily involved. So they are aware of the parking issues and the condition and the contribution that's being discussed here, and they believe there is sufficient within the funding regime that we're putting together.
I'll just, I mean, I'm going to make a little comment, but there's a question at the end of it. I mean, one of the things that I see, and I live not that far from the ground, but I'm not affected personally with parking, is there has been a moat shift, but there's been a moat shift towards cars. And the actual public transport routes that run near to ground, which you used to use to get down from Pudsey and from Bramley and that, basically those bus services have gone. Also, what's changed in the last 20 years, since Premiership was started up, is and Sky Television and various other television companies, is the time that the games start and when they are. Now, I'll just give you an example. Last evening, I was in Pudsey last evening, and to get home from there, at 10 o'clock at night, I had to get a private hire car. And I gets inside taxi, and it's got radio on. And to my surprise, there's a match between Burnley and Manchester United still playing, several minutes to go. And then it comes through, Leeds has scored at Newcastle, and they're 3-2 up. I understand. I found out this morning they lost 4-3, but that must have been. I know there were a lot of injury time in that, but the point I'm making is at 10 o'clock and after on a night, the public transport system's winding down. So what we're going to do to make sure that we're there when games are on.
So that's why a lot of the bus travel and coach travel are match day special services. So the R2 isn't public transport as such, it's a special service. So that clearly will continue. Same as the R3, R4, that they're only singular services, but one of them does go through Pudsey and out towards Bradford. And the other one is a post-match service back to Morley, for example. But I think that type of service, there is a very strong commitment within the travel plan that once the data of the new season ticket holders is available, that we will have accessibility mapping of that. We'll identify if there are gaps in provision, and that's the kind of thing, whether it's covered through opportunities for additional home supporter coaches, which can pick up some of these areas, or whether it's other match day bus services like the R number services. There will be a piece of work carried out to look at that. Clearly, there'll be a cost to the people using it, but we do have. So we've got remedial costs within the travel plan, for as you said, for the on-street parking, but also for other sustainable travel measures. There's £300,000 identified as a remedial measure if the targets aren't met straight away.
Okay. I'm going to have to move on, Councillor Blackburn. I will take you under comments if you want to come back on that. Councillor Finnegan, you were next.
Really, just to echo what David said, I mean, despite I'm sure it's an absolutely fabulous travel plan, but I represent the bottom of Cherwell Hill where there are already problems, you've already identified problems, and I think those problems are going to get worse. So one of the questions that I'd want to ask is the reactive traffic regulation order on street parking controls. Does that mean, should we identify that the problems are going to get worse, and I believe that they will, that we can implement traffic regulations orders to make sure that we have a residents-only parking scheme? And if that's the case, can we also have some of the costings that will be involved in making sure that that's enforced? This will only get worse when we do get the new White Rose station, because primarily they'll be parking all along there, notwithstanding it's going to be yellow lined anyway. So in terms of residents down in Cherwell, they're going to have some significant concerns about the fact that they're just going to get swamped, as they already do to a degree, and I think your figures already show that they do to a degree. And what we're going to make sure that their lives aren't made any more challenging than they are at the present day. The second question, and it might be for Leeds, it might be for the planning officers at this point, is somebody who's visited the ground as a visiting fan. How does this improve the experience of visiting fans? Because the experience at this point is exceptionally poor in my view. And are there any improvements that visiting fans will see as a result of this particular development? Thanks.
I'll bring Gillian in first, and then Matt wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you. So at the moment, it could be resident permit parking. It could be other forms of control. During the kind of like the whole process of this application, the council went out itself and carried out its own parking survey with residents around the ground. We weren't just asking about match days, we were asking generally about parking issues. Some people came back around match day parking, others didn't. You know, there wasn't huge numbers of people complaining about match day parking issues, but there were other issues raised around capacity and whatever. So the council is seeking to commit, albeit it's not part of this application, to implement, to take some of the funding from the sale of the land and implement schemes that address those issues that have come out through that car parking survey, effectively to address existing issues. The remedial funds that come in then from the club will address that potential for over and above, if there is any, to make sure that they are meeting their stated aim, and that is, you know, it really is tied down within that travel plan that they will have no increase in on-street parking. So that could well be resident permit parking zones.
Thank you. Councillor Finnegan, I'm not sure if you're aware of what the situation... Are you aware of how the fans are currently transited into the ground, the away fans? Do you have an understanding of that?
Away fan, yes.
Yes.
We've actually visited
So you're familiar with the phrase the gulag? Okay, so members who were on the site visit this morning, I will have no doubt, were aware of the away fan transit route that runs from Bobby Collins Way, where the coaches are brought in, to the current hosting point for away fans in the stadium, which is around the southwest corner within the West Stand, John Charles Stand. My knowledge on this is that this is a relic of bygone administrations seeking to maximise money, including in involving the sale of pies to away fans, where there are set amounts of it's a serious subject. A set amount of seats that had to be complied with, and the way to maximise income around that was to site them in the most expensive seats in the stadium, which is the John Charles West Stand, where they're positioned currently. It's not a great look, I think, is the way that I could give it. This turns that on its head. Now, I'm not going to sit here today and speculate as to where precisely away fans are going to be sited in the ground, but you can bet it's going to be in around the same position, because the reason we understand that is because of the advice that's come through from West Yorkshire Police that formulated the proposals around the away coach parking area, which is going to be sited to the edge of Ellen Road at the southwest corner of the stadium. What we do using that is we provide the shortest, most direct route with the best opportunities for safety and marshalling, circulation, rapid input and output of coaches, and fans having to take a much shorter walking distance rather than corralling them through what is, out of necessity, I'm afraid, a hostile-looking, brutalist tube that runs across the axis of the site. So that will be the biggest benefit, I think, in that it will return a little humanity to the experience for away fans. We all know that bad environments breed bad behaviour, and it's the adaptation to the built environment as it stands now are just one way of achieving that. But it's one component of a number of components around safety that we've considered alongside West Yorkshire Police. So how will it improve it? Well, I hope it doesn't improve it too much. On a competitive sporting level, but in terms of the experience of people coming to this city and an experience in our city, I think that's one massive leap forward that the scheme proposes.
Thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Carlisle, I had you next on my list.
Thank you. I've got one quite specific one to Gillian, and then one that's more general, which may need the applicant as well, but up to you, Chair, what suits. So the first one, just you mentioned, Gillian, around reviewing the car parking requirement after phase 1 going into phase 2, and I was just wondering if you could detail a bit more around that to give that reassurance of what that would look like. My second question then was going to be around. You mentioned the objection from Councillor Scopes in the introduction to it, but he came to speak to us about a number of things. There were parking and transport issues. Commitment to the local community was in there, and kind of local employment, and some bits that aren't necessarily planning enforced, antisocial behaviour and littering around the ground. I'd assume him removing that objection means that we've been able to do some work on that, and the application's come some way on that, but you didn't really detail in there, so I wondered if it was something you or the applicant could give us a bit more understanding of.
I'll bring Gillian in first, and then we'll decide who's best to answer the second question. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, for phase 2, so phase 1 is absolutely covered by the proposals in terms of the extra parking. In fact, they're over-providing, and there is the likelihood that we will get a reduction in on-street parking because of the over-provision of some of these other off-site car parks. For phase 2, however, we're about 600-ish spaces short in terms of that additional provision that's being put forwards. So in terms of the transport assessment, that's been looked at in terms of capacity in other off-street car parks around the stadium. So, for example, there are quite a lot of private car parks that open their doors, whether it's to staff or whether they actually charge them out, sort of thing, on match days. And so there might well be some capacity in that regard and no real need, because I think our main trigger is that we're not having additional on-street parking. So there might be additional off-street parking in those same zone areas, and that might cover it off. The other area in terms of the transport assessment that was used was kind of putting the use of existing car parking in the city centre. But realistically, there'll be times of the year where there isn't that spare capacity in the city centre, especially if it's a Saturday match. So I think that's just the ability to be able to review that through a revised transport assessment for phase 2. I think we find be very beneficial, and it does give us that a chance to look again at where we're at. The other thing is if and I know it's been put back, and therefore we're not reliant on it at all, but in terms of things like mass transit, if mass transit does come online and it does go near Leeds United, then there could well be a significant change in the need and the demand for further car parking. So things like that, we just thought it would be really beneficial to get that review done for the phase 2 application.
Okay, I'm going to bring Daljet in to answer your second question.
Yes, I don't think it'd be a surprise that there's clearly been ongoing discussions between the club and local community representatives, and ward councillors would be at the forefront of that. I think some of the matters that Councillor Scopes raised when he was last at panel were not material planning considerations. For example, the request for some sort of community fund to be set up. However, there were other matters which were clearly pertinent to the application, such as the transport and travel impact, and those aspects have been clearly reported in detail and commented upon today. Ultimately, it's for Councillor Scopes to decide whether he wants to continue to object to the application or not, and he has decided to withdraw his objection. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, next on my list is Councillor Gavani, please.
Thank you, Chair. First is on the construction management plan. As well as these are written on paper, even much smaller developments than this cause issues. For the benefit of the residents and the ward members in the area, can we have some sort of fast track contact through planning and into the construction teams to make sure that any issues that arise are dealt with rapidly? That's the first one. Do you want to take that one first, Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I'm gonna come back to my own story here. So, I just briefly, I started out on this project being brought in from another area team due to my expertise and experience dealing with large planning applications. And I've been at City Plans panel many times. I've made the move to manage this project in the longer term. We have to be very, very clear. We've received a number of objections on this point, and they have been highly, highly detailed. It's been a real challenge to break through that and find the pertinent points, and we have to keep a certain level of separation between ourselves and the public through that process. But with a grant of planning approval, what we then move on is a different phase. The broader service have elected to put me into the post here to deal with this long term, to deal with the running discharge of the conditions, etc., and actually to be a bit of a step change in how we can deal with the local residents. We clearly have to be quite standoffish and fair and even-handed in terms of how we communicate with people in this process. So we've stuck to our statutory role and duty in that and reported, rather than having that sort of constant community interaction that you might expect on perhaps some of the smaller schemes where we like to get around the table and discuss and flush out community issues. Now, in the event of a grant of approval, what I'm suggesting to you is, and in fact I'm committing to you today, is that there'll be a step change in that arrangement. There are certainly properties here who will be severely more affected by this bill than others. It's not an absolute science, so to speak, and it's not possibly just born out of the ones who are the nearest. It might be people who've got specific needs and requirements. Okay, so what I'm saying to you today is we're putting a consistent resource through that as a consistent thread through that condition discharge process. The construction management plans will include a requirement for there to be a liaison for rapid contact from people and members of the public. That's just good practice, and we do that everywhere. There will probably be occasions where the club, and we see this on other bills, need to deviate from their standard working hours, or the ones that we've chosen to control, for very specific reasons. There might be one time where the local highway infrastructure requires that they're bringing a very large piece of steel, for example, and we need to coordinate around getting that through the adjacent motorway junctions, for example. These are hypothetical situations, but they're examples of what occur. I recall with Victoria Gate, and I was like the assistant officer on that project many years ago, seeing half of one of the walls coming on the truck in front of me. Me and my ex-wife at the time were stuck in the traffic behind, trying to get into work. I just thought there's an irony in this, isn't there? But that's just a flippant example. But it's not a precise science on who will be affected in what way at what time. There's an equality issue here as well. We know one of the local residents in the vicinity is an elderly person, so we've considered that as well. And what I'm saying to you is there will be that thread of liaison and that consistency between the case officer who's dealt with the planning application and understands the dynamics of it, the specialist officers on both sides who advise what needs to go into that plan, and then a bit of community liaison. And I know by separate cover that the club are working up a strategy themselves on that. So we'll sit round the table post any decision, and we'll look at what that needs to look like based on the expertise that we've got in-house, and also the club's consultants and their advice as well. Thank you.
The next is on the transport, and it's along the lines as already been mentioned about buses into the ground, into the area. And I think, Gillian, you said there was going to be a review and there was funding for potentially other services. I'm sure the A65 corridor and the A660 corridor would be quite useful for those services. But obviously, like you said, sort of sounds like Leeds United are already looking at getting all that information as to where their fans travel from within Leeds. So I'll put a bid in for those two corridors if possible. I'm not a Leeds United fan, so it won't benefit me, but I know plenty who it probably would benefit and help get out of cars, so it not then taking up spaces at the park and rides or in the city centre and getting buses from there. They can get buses straight down. So if we can definitely look at those two corridors from the north, and as has been mentioned, sort of still running them after 10 o'clock at night if the games go on.
Thank you, Councillor Cavani, for making that pitch for both mine and your wards. That's much appreciated. Do you want to come back on that, Gillian?
I've noted them. Yeah. I mean, we'll look everywhere. Everywhere we can, we've got the people coming to the games. We'll use that accessibility map and make sure that these are reviewed.
I'm sure we'll be lobbying again. Sorry, Councillor Cavani has another question.
Turned it off. It's on the employment and skills. In 12.1.19, there's a bullet point that says obligate Leeds United to use reasonable endeavours to cooperate with the council's employment and skills service. Could somebody please define reasonable endeavours to me, please?
That is an often debated and argued over point, which keeps a lot of lawyers in a lot of money. It's basically doing the best that somebody can do, which is reasonably possible, taking into account all commercial sensitivities and what is practically possible on the ground. But I'm not sure that the club would assure us that they will put their reasonable endeavours forward and do the best they can.
In my previous working career, if I'd used a term like that, I would have been lynched by my managers for those very reasons. What's reasonable to one person is unreasonable to another. It's a bit of a difficult term.
I'm sure everybody will be trying their best, Councillor Cavani. OK, thank you. I've got Councillor Dye next, please.
I'm going to refrain from asking any of my questions because I think everybody's been reading my notes and we've done travel plan lots and that was what I was talking about.
Thank you, Councillor Dye. I've got Councillor Anderson next and then Councillor Manaka after that. Thank you.
I've got a number of ones, but I'll try and come together. You mentioned a lot to do with mass transit and getting buses. Now, I was asking WICA yesterday what commitments they've given for this, and they tell me they've not given any commitments yet, none whatsoever. They cannot guarantee that mass transit will go immediately around Elland Road. It might go in the vicinity, as much as they were willing to go with me when I asked them about it. On the bus franchising, the Mayor's been very clear that in 2027 she's going to bring in the services that were in existence about a couple of years ago, and that's it for the initial, in terms of the money that she's got available. So how are we going to get more commitments? Well, have you been getting commitments that aren't in the public domain yet, that you can put in the public domain just now, that you've got assurances from WICA that they will prioritise bus transport to and from there, which will then lead me to ask the question, well, which parts of the city are going to have to take a reduction in order to fund that, because there is only a finite cake available. So you take it from one, you give it to somebody else. How are you going to deal with that one? And the White Rose station, again, when I got a briefing on it yesterday, they don't actually see the White Rose station being used as a contact point for Elland Road, because of the distances that would be required to travel. And coming on to that, which is is if we get more coaches and buses coming around, the best priority would be to give them priority on the roads. But if you do that, you then got to take away the priority from buses or from cars. You can't. The road space is only the road space. We can't magic up more road space. So how are you going to manage that? Because there'll be a lot of conflicts on that, and there'll be a number of people trying to move about the city who are not sports fans. I personally am, but a lot of people are not necessarily sports fans, and they're going to get pretty upset if they suddenly get held up trying to get from A to B because the road space has been taken away. So how are you going to safeguard that? And then the final thing is that I personally am convinced that the club will do everything they can once they find out who their season ticket holders are. But what happens if the season ticket holders don't change their behaviours for good reasons? How do we then deal with the problems that that's going to cause? So in other words, if you don't get the modal shift, but the club have used their best endeavours or whatever they want to, how you word it. And we can't actually hold them up and say, well, you didn't do everything you can, because they can prove it. How are we going to deal with that? I mean, there is a lot of benefits coming from this, so don't take it that I'm against the development. It's the transport side that concerns me, because we do unfortunately, the council does not have a great reputation for delivering transport systems that actually improve things. Usually it means somebody loses out big style. Doesn't matter whether it's in the city centre going to the train station or out on the A660 that was referred to. There are disasters along these roads, and they'll get worse the more people we get into the city.
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to mass transit, I did mention it in relation to phase 2, but just for absolute clarity, there is no reliance on mass transit for this development, both phase 1 and phase 2. So all of the capacity requirements to get people to the ground have been assessed for phase 1 and phase 2 in terms of the additional services that are needed. And we've got specifically additional bus services. We've got additional R2s coming from the city centre. And at the moment, that strategy is that people can use existing public transport to get to the city centre, whether that's bus or rail. And then the R2 service will take them to the ground. So that's kind of the strategy at the moment, albeit, as I say, there is a commitment to look at whether other direct services will be viable. And when I say viable, it would wash their face in terms of cost of spectators coming from pockets around Leeds. So just for clarity, so the R2 is significantly increased. The park and ride shuttles are significantly increased. The shuttles from White Rose are new, and will be accommodated in terms of those who, some will choose to walk, but others there will be shuttles there available because of the distance. In terms of rail, the White Rose rail station. So in terms of bus franchising, that was the next question. I did put up the list of a table with all the existing public transport services in. The R2 and the shuttles from the Park and Ride and the new shuttle coming from White Rose are not public transport. They are special match day services that WICA has no involvement in. So they're arranged between the club and the operators of those services. So first for the buses, and I think at the moment it's Hunter's coaches for the Park and Rides. So that's outside franchising. It isn't, WICA don't have a role in that at the moment. Whether they would like a role going forwards, we'll carry on that open conversation with them. But at the moment, those extra services that the club relies on are not really, they don't get affected by bus franchising. So White Rose rail station not being used. So in terms of the rail, and huge increases are proposed for rail use. 97% of the people coming by rail are modelled as using Leeds rail station, not White Rose. So at the moment, at Cottingley, there's about 1%, just over 1% coming to Cottingley, and then the other, 98 point something % using Leeds rail station. When White Rose station opens, they're expecting it to go up slightly because of the expectations on service frequency and locations with a direct service. But it's a very small percentage of the total. And in terms of certainly for phase 1, if that opens before White Rose rail station's operational, then those issues are not of concern in terms of more of them using Leeds rail station rather than White Rose. So I think in terms of what we're doing, I'm not concerned. Yeah. Sorry. Bus and coach priority. The only bus and coach priority, and I don't know if I've got a slide, but I showed you where the bus and coach station is. There is a direct access route directly off M1 junction 2, M621 junction 2, sorry. And in that way, that's good bus priority because it gets them away from the Elland Road movements, and they can get directly in, directly out to those areas that they're going. So I think that's really useful, and we are maintaining that facility. That is WICA operated.
Just I wasn't necessarily talking about coaches as such. It was the specific, you know, if you're travelling on a bus to come into the city centre and you've got one that does make it all the way down towards Ellen Road, because you mentioned, I think it was at 24, I think it was the one you mentioned that would affect my area. If it starts coming in at busy times, it means it throws the whole timing out. I mean, to quote bus services, the X84 causes all problems because the length of the route and the number of problems that are along the route which make it inefficient. So you won't necessarily have the level of service that you're talking about, even with the best will in the world, because the more people you start squeezing into because you come into the centre, the more buses you come in. Go through Headingley Lane, for example. There's too many buses literally go through there because that's what causes a lot of the problems. So it's how are you going to deal with that, because you need to give priority to the coach, the ones that the mayor is going to be running, the bus franchising ones. She needs to be able to have decent priority measures put in place to enable her bus service to move in and out freely, increase the frequency, because she tells us that we'll get more buses more regularly and the timings will be better. That's the whole point of it. What detriment are you going to be able to resolve to enable her to deliver? Because you're going to cause a problem with this one. So what are you going to do to get? Well, what I'm really getting at, the truth be told, I mentioned it's subsidies. Are Leeds United considering subsidising and saying to people, well, if you've got a match ticket, you can use public transport for nothing, for example. That shouldn't be funded by WICA, because people in Calderdale might not necessarily want to get their taxes used for that purpose. So has that been discussed, that you include an element in the ticket that guarantees you free bus service, which would actually move things, and then you can prioritise those buses coming in because you know what the demand is going to be on that bus service on that particular day? Because some people might decide to come into the city centre early one day and just stay and spend some money in the centre. It's what I'm getting at is doesn't seem to be joined up. Each individual part, I think, can be delivered, but it's when you take it as a sum, I'm concerned that it won't all fit together. The jigsaw won't fit together. The individual bits probably will be successful. It's the jigsaw, when it comes together, I'm not convinced you're going to be able to do it successfully.
I'll have a go. We've talked about the monitoring process. We've talked about the mitigation measures that are in place. And I think importantly, we've talked about the enhanced collaboration that's going to continue, hopefully after today. And that's going to be really key. So all the things that you've just mentioned, Councillor Anderson, should be on the table, and the representatives of the club are listening to what you have to say. And yeah, these things have been mentioned and in the discussions, and they need to be taken further, because we can't get away from the fact, and I think as Matt articulated earlier, this is a challenging planning application in front of us, but it's an exciting one, it's an interesting one, and it's a very positive one for the city. And but it will bring challenges in terms of the highway and other aspects. So we think we've got a balanced package here, but it's going to be dependent on, as you say, all those things coming together and all the partners working closely together. And we have that commitment as we sit here, and I can see nods in the audience which are reassuring behind you, and that needs to continue, because we want to see 53,000 people in this stadium as soon as possible. Well, the city does.
I'll just speak to that point and more broadly as well, and please forgive me because I do talk allegorically sometimes, but I recall in the 80s there was a speech given by Ronald Reagan, and he was talking about President Gorbachev, and he said the Russians have got a saying, trust but verify. And in a number of areas here around travel planning, around security and public safety management, for a lot of years the arrangements have been just built on tacit trust arrangements between the council and other stakeholders, etc. What this planning consent does in a massive number of areas is give us the opportunity to verify and review. So we don't have to just trust, we can verify as well. And I think if you have that in your mind in terms of construction management, in terms of the interaction with the security advisory group, etc., regards waste management, etc. There are a number of strands through the conditions in the Section 106 agreement that give the council that future engagement and say in that process that we haven't had before, and I believe that's possibly one just another example of that runs through that permission. Thanks. So apologies for taking you off on a little whimsical tour there, but hopefully I made my point.
Moved on to Ronald Reagan as well now. We're going all over this afternoon. Councillor Manaka, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one on the mugger. I'm just wanting to understand how it looks like, because it will be where buses will be parked, and as well as being used as a mugger for obviously the Leeds United. Is it the local Leeds United sports and all? So I'm just wanting to understand, how does it look like? Because it kind of like doesn't make sense to me now. I'm thinking, is it just a rigid kind of like concrete, or how does it look like?
Forgive me, Councillor, we're just making some arrangements to just bring up some larger plans on the screen, so we'll just be a couple of minutes on that, just so I can better illustrate that to you. Essentially what we've got is we've got a concept sketch of that, and we know the dimensions of it, and we know that there's going to need to be a robust boundary treatment for a number of reasons: visual amenity, the impacts on the houses opposite, etc. It's a daytime operation. It's not going to be a through the night situation. It's a facility of relatively limited scale. Just bear with me, I'm just trying to bring up a site plan. Okay. So along here, there's going to be a planted boundary treatment, behind which there's going to be a boundary treatment dictated by the requirements of its function as a car parking space in terms of security, etc. Along that bottom edge there, we'll be seeking a landscape treatment control through the conditions, the precise species of which we don't have yet before you, but essentially you're looking at a height of around about sort of 2.5 metres. So that's got to be an attractive wall, whether that's done through planting, whether that's done through art links to the club and the community, etc. We are holding full details of that by condition, because it is another instance of we are putting forward to you a broad understanding of what this is going to look like, but again, phrase often used, devil's in the detail, but we have a condition to deal with that. And what we will do is we will, again, if at all possible, this is another example of where we will seek to maximise planting, etc. But we've got to have a better understanding and nuanced understanding of what the technical requirements of operating that are, because it may well be that through the security management plan, interaction with the SAG, etc., certain recommendations, through the discussions that this consent will secure, and the sign-offs that are needed by a number of stakeholders on matters on a yearly review basis, might dictate what that looks like yet. So I'm 90% certain that's what it's going to look like, but that sets out our approach, and you know what the dimensions of it and the general principle of it are. We'll control the details of it to make sure it looks good, and it serves its purpose in terms of the amenity of those occupiers along Elland Road. And again, that's another point I speak to about that ongoing dialogue that we're planning to have with residents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Seary, you're next on my list.
Yeah, thank you. Very detailed presentation, really good. Just a couple of points I've picked up on. You mentioned wayfinding signs, but you didn't mention any lighting. Would any additional street lighting be put in place along these ways? And then you mentioned about the taxis we're moving. Is there a new drop-off proposal area, and how would all that work as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So there is a condition. So we've got 140,000 and some in the Section 106 to do the upgrade to the wayfinding. So I don't have a proposal to show you other than what I put on the screen previously. It could potentially cover not lots, but some additional lighting if it was deemed to be required. But that is a piece of work that the council will undertake, is to fully walk and review those routes that I showed, and get the signage and any other minor infrastructure issues that need to be picked up within the realms of that 140,000 contribution. Certainly the signing itself shouldn't go anywhere near that figure, so there will be some capacity within that figure. But until I see what the scheme is, I can't particularly give you, say definitely yes, but it certainly covers off all the signage requirements. And if we need additional drop crossings, for example, as part of that review, that would be picked up as well. I mean, the applicant did do a full walking audit. They have done the audit, but that was just more around general use rather than use with lots, for crowd use in terms of the football side of things. So that's where we'll be picking it up in more detail. The drop-off zone. Yeah.
Is it the one near the McDonald's we're talking about?
No. Well, there's an existing. So there's an existing taxi rank near McDonald's on Elland Road, but kind of like off to the side near McDonald's, and that is being retained and will stay as is. That's purely for black and white Hackney carriages as a taxi rank. But then because we're introducing the red route and we are effectively restricting people from dropping off there, which would include private hire, wouldn't be able to drop off on Elland Road. We are there is an area. I don't know if we've got a plan.
You keep talking. I'll cycle.
It was just on, it was on one of mine. If it's still there,
Lewis, can you?
I think it's the one with the.
Yeah, will you swap the deck back?
It's just on the bottom of Lowfield Road, and there's a location shown on one side of the road that would take about 9 private hire vehicles. And when I say private hire, the kind of restrictions we put in would just allow any vehicle to drop off or pick up from that zone. So it's just giving people somewhere identified that they can get dropped off and picked up, and they won't get, a ticket for the red route. So it's about 9 or so vehicles in length, and it will require a traffic regulation order to go in to facilitate that. We are also looking at whether that will be marshalled and whether there'll be any queuing requirements, but that's part of the condition to get that layout done. But I think because of what we were doing on Elland Road itself, we needed to identify somewhere feasible for people. Yeah, they found the. So it's just up here. It's just in this area up here. So it will take some of the existing car parking away to allow that drop-off zone to go in, but we're not talking a huge amount.
Okay, thank you, members and officers and everyone for answering those questions. I don't have anybody else on my list to ask questions, so I'm going to ask one last time. Does anyone have any further questions to officers before we move to comments? No. Okay, thank you, everyone. Councillor Jones? No? No. Okay, right. So moving on to comments then that members may have. Councillor Jones has a comment. I've got Councillor Blackburn, Councillor Macker. So I'll start with Councillor Jones, please.
Well, having been a Leeds fan for many years and visiting the ground in 1967 to a 5th round replay where we had 57,000 people in that ground, believe it or not, and the wall collapsed, if I remember rightly. We've still not quite got to that level, so I'm quite happy, but I'm very supportive of this. I think we've got 20,000 people dying to get a ticket. I would add, I have been to Elland Road on Boxing Day when there's been no buses, and bizarrely enough, it was still a full ground. So I understand the concerns around transport, but I guarantee one way or another, people will want to be in that ground before it starts. And if they can't get car parking, the next time they'll make a very different arrangement. So I'm comfortable with that, to be honest.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Blackburn.
I'll start on a positive note, and it's regarding local jobs. Just a bit of information for Leeds United. Assuming they are going to get this through. The thing is if you actually go and have a look at the Emirates Stadium or the new Wembley Stadium, you will find some large pieces of metal that makes that up were manufactured in Hunslet. So you don't have that far to go to get some local jobs. So I expect you to, if you go ahead with this scheme, to actually employ some people in Hunslet. I know that because the firm that did it, I used to work for. So back on to the thing. I've got no problem with improving stadium. I think it needs doing, and I welcome that. I've got some issues and I've got to say they're not planning issues, and I've some sympathy for people who are living opposite. And I would hope that Leeds United talk to the people opposite and try and assist and try and do something about it, because quite honestly, it certainly during the construction process it might be hell living there. But when it comes to travel plan, I'm far from being convinced that it's going to work, and on that basis I can't support it. But quite honestly, what you need to do is you need to talk with all members in sort of South West Leeds around the ground who have the problems of on-street parking, and talk with them while we're carrying on through this process. But as I say, I can't support it as it stands.
Okay, I think we've addressed the construction. I think Matt addressed that in his presentation there. Councillor Manaka, I've got you next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Comments. I am liking the point 3.811 on page 63 in terms of the asset of community value. That if the owner decides to sell, the community will be consulted for that. I do appreciate that in terms of page 63, and also just going on to the work and jobs, also just appreciating the fact that they will be considering, if this is obviously if it goes through, they will be considering jobs that are local, which is really great to to read. It was just that positive comment that was really great to see, because most times you might find people local don't actually get the jobs, but this was quite great and to read, quite refreshing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dye, please.
Thank you. I think I wanted to start by saying thanks. Really, there's been a huge amount of work clearly from the beginning of this process to where we are now. I started out with lots of questions, and after the first session, some of them have been answered, and the more we've gone through it, the more I have had answers to a lot of the questions I had about particularly sustainability, about responses to climate emergency, about travel. So I think, having read the report, having listened to presentations, I'm confident that a lot of those questions I initially had have been addressed, and that's really nice to see. From today, I think the main thing I would take away is just the reassurance, and I hope I'm correct in being reassured that the issues we've discussed a lot today around the travel plan are still up for review. And that, it's not something set in stone. Clearly, a lot of people have said it's a huge potential issue to get right in terms of effect on residents, in terms of the way people are moving around, but also in terms of addressing the climate emergency. I think there's a part in the report where it says that modal shift is one of the key things that needs to be got right. So I do hope that message has been received loud and clear, that there needs to be constant review about how people are getting to and from the ground, and if it isn't working, then measures put in place to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dye. I've got Councillor Anderson next, and then Councillor Brooks.
Right. I'm totally happy and in favour of this, and will be supporting it. I have, however, got some concerns that I think need to be, I don't know how we deal with them, but we've already heard about the travel plan concerns. Also, I personally am convinced that the club will do their part, but what happens when the partners don't do their bit? I am convinced that the club are going to do everything, but it's the Leeds City Council, it's the WICAs of the world. What happens if they don't deliver? Because they are fundamental to the success of this project, and it's how can we ensure that excuse me, how can we ensure that they will do their part and they will bring their A game to help Leeds United reach their ambitions. But I do have concerns that they might not be able to do it. Also, enforcement on the parking enforcement. How's that going to be managed? How's that going to be financed? Are you going to be piling people in with appropriate costs that's going to be there? Who's going to pick it up? What about conflicts between what's a police offence and what's a parking offence? Because certainly in my area that's the biggest bone of contention. The police say, oh no, this is up to Leeds City Council to sort it out. Leeds City Council say, no, that's the police can actually enforce it. So you've got conflicts there, how are you going to deal with that? And then the final thing is the conditions that are on there. I'm not an expert, I'm not a legal expert in any shape or form, but experience tells me that the way we write our conditions, sometimes a good lawyer can run a coach and horses through them. So have all of these conditions been read and agreed by a legal department down to the nth degree to make sure that they don't see any potential holes in them, because I've got bitter experience of Leeds City Council assuring me things are fine, and then some certain types of lawyers can come along and point out, well, you didn't cover this, you didn't cover that, and then enforcement have got to say, sorry councillor, but the conditions mean we can't enforce this condition anymore.
We are on comments, Councillor Anderson, so I can't bring in people to answer that, but I'm sure your comments have been noted by the relevant officers to pick up going forward with this. Yep, thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. I think first of all, I'd just like to say I'm blown away by the hard work that the officers have put into this application. I know that several have gone above and beyond, working ridiculous hours to get this to this panel. So I think first of all we should all be grateful to have such talent on Leeds City Council. So, and through their hard work, I think a lot of the concerns that we've brought as a panel has been addressed. I think my dad is watching this, and he, as a Leeds United supporter, will be really, really pleased that we've all pulled together, I think, as a council and like a planning authority, and worked with the applicant and made sure that, I mean, no application is going to be perfect, is it? But I think a lot of the concerns that we were really, really very worried about have been addressed. So I am very happy to support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. And I think we can all reiterate those comments about, thanking officers for the amount of time, especially over the, Christmas break and getting things ready for today's panel. So, yeah, thank you to all the officers for working above and beyond to make sure that we could bring this to panel in a timely fashion. Councillor Finnegan, I have you next.
Thank you, Chair. Despite my personal football loyalties, I'm happy to support this particular application. I would emphasise the importance of dealing with problems on match day in terms of residential parking and what could happen in residential areas, and I am reassured that there is enough money in a fund that will deal with TROs should they be necessary, and I would hope the associated costs of rigorous enforcement under those circumstances. I share Councillor Blackburn's concerns that the travel plan is a fabulously written travel plan, but what happens when it clashes with reality, as I suspect that it actually will. We want to make sure that all ward members, whether in my ward or David's ward, are fully consulted at a point where we have problems and supported in their endeavours to make sure that residential areas aren't impacted significantly by this improved capacity that Leeds are going to get. We'd also welcome the Section 106 in terms of the jobs and training. We did have a similar Section 106 agreement with the White Rose when the White Rose was expanded. That was very successful from a local point of view, I think Morley got 70% of the new jobs that were created at that stage. I would hope that the same approach and the same level of cooperation would exist in this. Outside that, I'm happy to support.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Finnegan. I have nobody else listed to make a comment. Councillor Seary, you want to make a comment, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Coming in this afternoon, I had huge concerns how we'd get 15,000 extra people in and out, but highways have put my mind at ease, so I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no more. Any more comments? Everybody happy? Okay, thank you. So, before I move to the vote, does any officer want to add anything, clarify anything? We all happy? I know you have given us lots of clarifications. So
just to say we're all very grateful for the nice comments that have just been passed. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Before you move to the vote, shouldn't somebody propose it?
I am getting to that. I just wanted to make sure that no officers wanted to add anything before I get that far. Yeah. Councillor Brooks. That's what I'm going to do now. Yeah, I'm just making sure we're all happy with everything before I get that far. Okay, so we have the recommendation on page 56 of your report. Do I have a member who would like to propose and second that? I've got Councillor Jones, Councillor Gavan. I've got lots of members. Councillor Jones, Councillor Gavan who were first. Okay, so we have the recommendation on page 56 proposed and seconded. Can I now ask members, by show of hands, can I have those in favour of the recommendation to show your hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and myself, that's 11. Any abstentions? No abstentions. Anyone against? 1. Okay, so that's 11 members in favour, no abstentions, 1 against. So that recommendation is carried. So thank you to everybody for your attendance today. I appreciate it. Has been a long afternoon, and we have had a lot of information. I'd like to thank officers again for all the hard work, and to Leeds United as well for all the hard work that I know has gone in to making sure that this application came to panel by this date, so that work can start the minute the season finishes. So thank you, everybody. The next meeting is Thursday the 5th of February, and thank you all again for your attendance and everyone's hard work. Oh.